The King's Avatar audiobook by Kevin Chapter 1681. The response of the top prose translator. Namyumi editor. Namyumi in terms of damage taken, Samsara was actually doing quite well. The damage from Darkness Boundary was negligible. It was a prime example of a skill that was effective for its ability to create openings through its crowd control effects. However, despite being blinded in Xiu Yifin's Darkness Boundary, Samsara didn't take much damage. It wasn't that Happy wasn't trying. It was just that they had to respond to Samsara's answers. With 4 characters blinded, most teams would scatter to make it easier to escape from the Darkness Boundary. Even if 1 or 2 were focused down by the enemies and delayed, the others would quickly escape and be able to turn around and help their teammates escape. But this wasn't what Samsara did. After being blinded, the 4 of them moved together as one unit. It seemed like a disaster in the making, but Jiang Batao's empty waves created a beautiful protective barrier for them with Nebula Wave Slash, preventing Happy from reaching them. They had made mistakes and overlooked certain players on the enemy team, but when it was time for them to take on the necessary burden, they didn't panic. They maintained the confidence and calm that a championship team should possess. The 4 on Samsara couldn't see what was going on around them, but they had their characters turn and move, calmly leaving the Darkness Boundary under the protection of Nebula Wave Slash. The only one who hadn't been blinded, Zhou Zekai, had also given them the greatest support possible. Under Suma Cheng's barrage of artillery fire, he had miraculously interrupted Xiu Yifin's follow-up Ghost Boundary. Unfortunately, Xiu Yifin's 1-inch ash wasn't the only one with Phantom Demon capabilities. Ye Xiu, Lord Grim. While Zhou Zekai was completely preoccupied, Ye Xiu was easily able to set up a Darkness Boundary, linking it together with 1-inch ashes. As soon as the 4 on Samsara exited the first, they stepped into the second. The Nebula Wave Slash from Jiang Batao's empty waves didn't last forever, providing protection for them until they left the first Darkness Boundary was its limit. Both the Lightning Wave Formation and Nebula Wave Slash were now out of the picture. Darkness surrounded them and they were no longer protected. Tang Ru's soft mist was already rushing towards them. This time, how would Samsara stop Happy's advance? Zhou Zekai, he was only one person. Happy was attacking from 4 directions. It was impossible for him to take care of all of them. Pincer go around 3, follow 2, fall back. These were Happy's initial arrangements, and at this moment their characters were shining with brilliance after completing them. It was because of their positioning that Samsara had overlooked an enemy player twice. It was because of their positioning that the number 1 player, Zhou Zekai, had no way to protect the other 4 on Samsara. The other 4 on Samsara had finally responded though. They had been a bit surprised at first, but they quickly regained their composure. Jiang Batao immediately shouted "scatter" in the chat. Samsara had moved together as one previously because of Nebula Wave Slash. The skill had provided them with a protective barrier that enabled them to push forward without worry. Once they left the Darkness Boundary, they would be able to launch a fierce assault towards Happy's healer. However, they hadn't expected dual-linking Ghost Boundaries from Happy. Given their current situation, they had no way to protect everyone all at the same time while blinded. As a result, they could only go with the usual tactic and scatter. Everyone on Samsara was a top player. It might be the same tactic, but it was completely different when executed by Team Sasmara. When normal players scattered, it would be every man for himself. The more that got away, the better. However, when Samsara scattered, there was logic and order to it. They scattered to minimize the casualties. The key, the healer. If all 4 scattered, who would be the easiest for Happy to focus down? The healer. No one mentioned it in Samsara's team chat because no one needed to. Any one of the others could be focused, but if Fang Minghua's laughing song was taken into Happy's grasps, Samsara would be in an extremely terrible position. This was the difference between pro players and normal players. Minimizing the damage taken wasn't necessarily the most optimal goal. Keeping the situation balanced, maintaining intact formation, controlling the tempo, etc., all of these aspects needed to be considered. The first thing Samsara did was provide support for Fang Minghua's laughing song. This task obviously couldn't be given to the other three who were blinded. Unless they had another skill similar to Nebula Wave Slash, they wouldn't be able to protect him from all sides. The only one who could take the task was Zhou Zekai. Scatter, attack, all of these thoughts, all of these changes happened in a split second. Dragon breaks the ranks, shining cut, two figures dashed out, one autumn leaf and cruel silence. Blind didn't stop them from using skills. Both of them used movement skills. As for which direction they went in, forward, both of them went forward. The order was to scatter, but neither one autumn leaf nor cruel silence did. The two characters rushed out towards the same direction. They were running away, but in the process of doing so, they didn't forget to keep up the pressure on Happy. Of course, their aim wasn't the most accurate because of the blind. The direction that they went in might not have any targets, but even so, they might be able to escape from the darkness boundary. Even if they didn't, they would be one step closer to their objectives. Dancing rain, little cold hands. The two were in this direction, and both were very afraid of an enemy getting close. Sun Xiang and Wu Qi coordinated their escape and rushed forward together. During their escape, they needed to keep up the pressure on Happy. At this moment, there was nothing they could do about Happy's attacks towards them. However, by doing this, Happy would need to take into consideration how much of a threat Sun Xiang and Wu Qi would be to Sima Cheng and Wenyi. Would they need to prepare countermeasures against this threat? This was Samsara's response. This was a response befitting a top team. Their response forced the enemy to answer back. Even if four of them were in a bad position, their reply back was filled with aggression. At the same time, Jiang Batao's empty wave swung his divine chain. Ice wave slash. Ice crystals swept forward without a target. Empty wave stepped on the path of ice that he paved, moving in the opposite direction of one autumn leaf and cruel silence. This direction, shattering the lands. Tang Ru charged forward the moment the four Samsara players scattered. One autumn leaf and cruel silence dashed out, while soft mist used shattering the lands. The two characters had used movement skills, allowing them to escape from shattering the land's range. Unfortunately for Jiang Batao, he was heading straight towards it. He couldn't see, but there was one person in Samsara who could. Jiang, right 30 shattering the lands, Zhou Zekai warned the moment soft mist attacked. His meaning, Jiang Batao 30 degrees to the right shattering the lands. If the attack was there, then the character was there. How to respond? Zhou Zekai didn't say. He didn't have the time to give too detailed of a response. Empty waves hadn't even taken 2 steps along the icy path that he paved when Jiang Batao noticed Zhou Zekai's warning. Shattering the lands was an AI attack. It was 30 degrees to his right and had already come out. Empty waves had taken 2 steps in that direction. His chances of avoiding it, 0. I can't dodge. I can only attack back. Empty waves turned around. He turned right 30 degrees and swung his sword. Jiang Batao couldn't see anything, but in his mind he could see the shattering the lands descending. Light wave slash. The fastest wave slash shot out. Would it hit? Jiang Batao didn't know, so he didn't stop there. Empty wave swung his sword again. Fire wave slash. The strongest of the wave slashes flew out at an angle slightly lower than the previous light wave slash. Boom! Shattering the lands crashed down. Magic swept the ground. However, at the same time, everyone could see that soft mist was engulfed in flames. The fire wave slash had hit. Chapter 1682. The Center of Cruelty. Chapter 1682. The Center of Cruelty. Translator. Namyami Editor. Namyami hit. Fire wave slash landed. Through Zhou Zekai's concise tip in the team chat and his own intuition, Jiang Batao was able to land fire wave slash on soft mist while blinded. Although his empty waves wasn't able to dodge shattering the lands, there was nothing else he could have done. He had been on the back foot but was able to force a trade, and quite an impressive one too. Battle magic erupted, raging flames blazed. The two skills displayed their destructive power. The earthquake triggered by shattering the land sent empty waves tumbling. At the same time, the fire wave slash swallowed soft mist, sending her crashing to the ground in a blaze of fire. Fire hit, Zhou Zekai confirmed the hit in the team chat. He was telling Jiang Batao that his fire wave slash had hit. It was equivalent to telling Jiang Batao where soft mist was. Jiang Batao understood. His stumbling empty waves raised his sword. The crowd cheered and clapped excitedly at this play, but the pro players were truly stunned. Not for the fire wave slash, but for the raise of his sword. Because this time, empty waves was bearing the brunt of shattering the lands. Battle magic battered him, sending empty waves stumbling the entire way through. Empty waves was still blinded too. Even under these conditions, Jiang Batao was able to keep empty waves balance and prevent him from falling to the ground. This was incredible enough already, yet he was also able to keep his sense of direction. Sword raised, gunshot, cloud piercer fired. Zhou Zekai wasn't only paying attention to Tang Ru and Jiang Batao. As the only person on Samsara who could see, he needed to keep track of everything taking place on the battlefield. Sun Xiang's one autumn leaf and Wu Qi's cruel silence launched a sudden assault. To no one's surprise, Sima Cheng and Wenyi chose to retreat. They knew that once the two left the darkness boundary, it would be disastrous if they got too close. Thus, they might as well take precautions. As they retreated, they also took the opportunity to attack. Sima Cheng's dancing rain fired mercilessly towards the two blinded characters. Boom, boom, boom. Dancing rain's artillery shells bombarded one autumn leaf. Samsara's fans didn't think much of it. However, many of Happy's fans consisted of former Excellent Era fans. This scene made them feel quite uncomfortable. One autumn leaf, dancing rain, best partners for 4 consecutive years. To the Excellent Era fans, they were used to seeing dancing rain providing cover for one autumn leaf, and one autumn leaf protecting dancing rain from enemies getting close. But now, dancing rain was trying to kill one autumn leaf. This wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Perhaps the scene of the two characters fighting together shoulder to shoulder might never appear again. But no one knew how long it would take for them to get used to this scene. Maybe it would be like this forever. Whenever dancing rain and one autumn leaf appeared on the battlefield together, everyone's first thought would be the two as partners, not enemies. Enemies. Every Glory fan who held a deep impression of these partners couldn't help but repeat these words in their heads. Then, they saw one autumn leaf charging towards dancing rain, not to protect, but to pressure her. They saw dancing rain aiming at one autumn leaf, not to provide cover but to stop his advance. I'm sure a lot of you are feeling sad seeing this scene. Even Pan Lin couldn't help but comment on something outside of the scope of the match. But this is one of the cruelties of competition. The viewers watched the cruelty happening and felt for the players on stage. Gunshot. A bullet flew from Cloud Piercer's gun towards Dancing Rain. Zhou Zekai was pressuring Dancing Rain. It could be considered as an attempt to interrupt this cruelty. However, Sima Cheng was the center of this cruelty, and she needed to persevere and continue for her team. She dodged Cloud Piercer's attack and continued to bombard one autumn leaf with artillery shells. You really are strong. Ye Xiu was also on stage. He could see everything as well. He knew that facing one autumn leaf was perhaps even more difficult for Sima Cheng. When Ye Xiu saw one autumn leaf, he at least knew that he himself wasn't the one there. But to Sima Cheng, One autumn leaf had always standing beside her. He was still standing there, but now his spear was pointed at her. One autumn leaf might not be a friend anymore, but I still am. Cloud Piercer fired at dancing rain. Empty Waves raised his sword. By relying on his intuition, he was going to attack Soft Mist again. A figure suddenly flickered in front of him without any warning. Ye Xiu, Lord Grim. Lord Grim had been wandering around the left side, mainly using long-ranged attacks to strike Samsara's holes. Suddenly, a shadow clone was left there, his real body cutting to the center of the battle. Colliding stab, Lord Grim made his move. Zhang Batao had no idea what was happening. Zhou Zekai, who was supporting Sun Xiang and Wu Qi, hastily shifted targets in response to this sudden change. Warning, Zhang Batao in the team chat would be too late. Boom. The myriad manifestations umbrella struck the plate armor on Empty Waves. Empty Waves still swung his divine chains, but the gathered magic brushed past Soft Mist's side. Zhang Batao felt Empty Waves move. He felt Empty Waves getting hit by an attack. Who? By what? Lord Grim pressed his sword against Empty Waves, planning on bringing him away with him using colliding stab. Cloud Piercer's gunfire arrived, but another person unhappy had arrived as well. Kaya Oyifin. He coordinated together with Ye Xiu's Lord Grim from the right wing. Ye Xiu's Lord Grim had entered the darkness boundary, but he didn't. His 1-inch ash quietly circled around behind Cloud Piercer. There was only one pair of eyes on Samsara. Zhou Zekai had too many things he needed to take care of. His vision was limited. Happy had intentionally been focusing the main battle in one location, leaving an opening for Kyo Yifin to take advantage of. Get close, good enough, cast. The ghost god's power gathered around his blade. Kyo Yifin was extremely nervous. Would his attack hit? He stared intently at Cloud Piercer's back. He was afraid that Cloud Piercer would suddenly turn around and aim his gun at him. Cloud Piercer didn't turn around, but he did suddenly move. As he moved, his dual guns erupted in a blaze of sparks. In an instant, his bullets reached every part of the map. Rapid fire, random firing. Zhou Zekai was planning on using this type of burst to cover the entire battlefield by himself. Chapter 1683, Happy's Plans. Chapter 1683, Happy's Plans. Translator. Namiyami Editor. Namiyami. Cloud Piercer whirled around, bullets flying towards every critical point. Even under the effects from random firing and rapid firing, his aim was as precise as ever. Bullets, Kaya. Yifin didn't even see Cloud Piercer's gun aimed towards him. He just saw him flash by him for an instant, and a bullet was flying towards 1-inch ash, just a bit off. Kyo Yifin was somewhat unwilling to let the opportunity go, but there was nothing he could do. The cast time for ghost boundaries wasn't something that he could control. Dodge. He could only dodge. If he didn't dodge, he would be interrupted. But just when he dodged the bullet, he saw another one flying towards him. Zhou Zekai wasn't only focused on Kyo Yifin. There hadn't been any pauses both times Zhou Zekai faced towards him, but his bullets went for him nonetheless. It wasn't just him, but in Wenyi's little cold hands, Suma Cheng's dancing rain, Tang Ru's soft mist, Ye Xiu's Lord Grim. The crowd went wild. This was what they had been hoping for. This was what made Zhou Zekai so captivating. Using godlike inhuman skill to sweep away everything in his path. Random firing and rapid firing. A normal player would have no way of aiming properly, but Zhou Zekai was able to guide each bullet to wherever he liked. 1-inch Ash's ghost boundary failed. Sun Xiang and Wu Qi suddenly acquired a powerful shield of bullets. The two finally rushed out from the dark boundary, recovering their sight. They immediately set their eyes on dancing rain and little cold hands. The situation had changed. However, there was one part that hadn't. Ye Xiu's Lord Grim. Although Cloud Piercer's random firing and rapid firing had shot him full of bullet holes, it didn't stop him from using colliding stab. Zhou Zekai realized that something was wrong. With Cloud Piercer covering every member on Happy, he saw all of Happy's movements clearly. Sima Cheng and Nwenyi looked like they were retreating. Tang Ru's soft mist seemed to be trying to force his way through the rain of bullets to Cloud Piercer's side. Kaio Yifen's 1-inch ash was behind him, dodging his bullets but unable to complete any of his spells. Their movements, Lord Grim. They were coordinating with Lord Grim. In other words, Jiang Batao's empty waves was their true target. Too far. After realizing this point, Zhou Zekai came to the conclusion that the distance between empty waves and samsara was a problem. It might be a small one, and it was different from the coordinated assault from One Autumn Leaf and Cruel Silence. Samsara hadn't prepared for this change. Lord Grim's colliding stab had created it. Gunfire focused. The random and rapid firing hadn't ended. Zhou Zekai suddenly focused his efforts onto Lord Grim. A single bullet hitting had negligible hit stun. It wasn't enough to interrupt a skill cast, but when multiple bullets chained together in quick succession, the hit stun could no longer be ignored. Blood splattered into the air. Lord Grim's movements had clearly become slower, and Empty Waves was pulling away from the umbrella sword pressed against his chest. The dense gunfire was forcefully slowing down Colliding Stab, while also dealing quite a bit of damage to him. This sudden outburst created a new peak in energy from the crowd. The bright red blood was incomparable joy to the Samsara fans, but it was only for an instant. The wave of red blood stopped abruptly. Lord Grim was actually able to dodge the bullets. The viewers, the pro players, all of them felt their eyeballs fall out of their heads. What sort of inhuman skill was needed to be able to evade such dense and heavy gunfire? The control needed was astonishing, and Lord Grim was moving quite fast too, making it even more inconceivable. Ye Xiu didn't pause for everyone to ponder over it. After dodging to the side, Lord Grim used another skill. Falling Flower Palm. A palm flew out, striking Empty Waves and sending him flying backwards. Empty Waves had finally left the darkness boundary. Jiang Batao could see again, but what he saw was his Empty Waves flying away from his team. Before he could get a read on the situation, Lord Grim's myriad manifestations umbrella once again slammed into Empty Waves. Charge. Falling Flower Palm wasn't enough. Lord Grim used Charge, evading Cloud Piercer's pursuit, while also pushing Empty Waves even farther away. Happy's plan was already very clear at this point. Lord Grim was doing whatever he could to bring Empty Waves away, separating him from the rest of Team Samsara. The normal viewers had yet to catch on. What they saw was Sun Xiang and Wu Qi pressuring Sima Cheng and Nwenyi. What they saw was Zhou Zekai's godlike shooting. What they saw was Fang Minghua's laughing song casually walking out from the darkness boundary. Jiang Batao's Empty Waves was being pushed back, but in their eyes, it was just a small flaw in the overall situation. Moreover, Happy had paid a significant price to achieve this. Lord Grim had taken quite a bit of damage from Cloud Piercer's burst even with his unbelievably fast evasion. Even if he dodged, what could he do? The big stadium screen put on a slow-motion replay. It was only through this replay did people realize that Lord Grim had used a skill to get away from the rain of bullets. He had used the speed from Shining Cut to escape, but this made Ye Xiu's play even more terrifying. The window that he needed to do it in had been minuscule. It practically wasn't even a window, yet he was actually able to make it. Everyone sucked in a cold breath of air. Even the average viewer knew how terrifying such a feat was. To do it just to keep on attacking Empty Waves, was this small flaw really that small? From Ye Xiu's choices and his determination, quite a few people began to realize that Empty Waves' situation might not be so simple. Everyone began to shift their attention to that end. Empty Waves, Lord Grim, speeding bullets. Zhou Zekai's full attention was directed there. Besides him, no one could immediately step forward to obstruct Happy's plans. Sun Xiang and Wu Qi had used their movement skills to get out of the darkness boundary. Then, in order to put pressure on Sima Cheng and Wenyi, they chased after them. From Empty Wave's position, the two of them were running away from him. Fang Minghua's laughing song, who people thought would be Happy's main target, hadn't really been targeted at all. In the end, Laughing Song took his final step and made it out into the light. However, the first thing he saw was 1-inch Ash's blade, emanating with ghostly light. Chapter 1684, The Target to Shoot. Chapter 1684, The Target to Shoot. Translator, Namyami Editor, Namyami Interrupt. Fang Minghua's first thought was to interrupt Caio Yifen's cast. However, his laughing song was a cleric. He didn't have any skills that could instantly stop 1-inch Ash from completing his spell. 1-inch Ash was nearly done with the cast. When the ghost god's power finished gathering, the ghost boundary would be complete. Ghost! All Fang Minghua could do was warn his teammates. However, Sun Xiang and Wu Qi were both close-ranged characters and were far away from him. Zhang Batao's Empty Waves was Happy's main focus. Empty Waves was even farther away. Even if Empty Waves had long-ranged skills, it wouldn't be enough. There was only Zhou Zekai and his Cloud Piercer. Zhou Zekai's full attention was on assisting Zhang Batao's Empty Waves. He hoped to stop Happy from reaching their goal. If he could help Zhang Batao win even the slightest opening, Zhang Batao would be able to get out. But he couldn't. Ye Xiu had Lord Grim dodge what attacks he could, and tank what attacks he couldn't, all so that he could continue with the plan. In short, Zhou Zekai had to keep his focus there. He needed to keep trying. But at this moment he received Fang Minghua's warning. Zhou Zekai was helpless. He could only have Cloud Piercer turn. He had to interrupt Caio Yifen's 1-inch Ash. If not, the ghost boundary would certainly prevent him from attacking Lord Grim. Zhou Zekai acted swiftly. Cloud Piercer turned quickly, but no matter how fast he acted, it would still affect his pressure towards Lord Grim. The ghost boundary was interrupted again. This time, let alone Zhou Zekai, even the pro players outside felt like they had swallowed a housefly. These ghost boundaries are too tricky. Even if they fail, they mess up Zhou Zekai's rhythm. It's extremely helpful for Ye Xiu. If it were me, that would be the best I could do as well. Glory's #1 phantom demon Ye Xiu didn't hide his admiration for Caio Yifen. He was giving him praise in all regards. Stop sticking gold onto your own face. Have you noticed his positioning? Chu Yunxiu added. The pro players immediately paid attention to 1-inch Ash's positioning. Li Xiuan continued. Of course, he's positioned behind 1 autumn leaf and cruel silence. He's also lined up with Empty Waves and Cloud Piercer, using Cloud Piercer to block Empty Waves' sight of him. If Fang Minghua's laughing song had stepped out of the darkness boundary even a step later, the ice boundary would have likely succeeded. What if it were Crying Devil? Tyranny's Zhang Xinji suddenly said. Ah, that's the unfortunate part. Li Xiuan nodded his head. His Crying Devil was the #1 phantom demon, and all phantom demon skills required cast times. As a result, cast speed was a top priority. His Crying Devil was 1 tier above Caio Yifen's 1-inch Ash in terms of stats. If 1-inch Ash had been Crying Devil, Fang Minghua's warning would have been too late. The pro players only took a few seconds to discuss all this. However, Happy and Samsara hadn't stopped to wait for them. Numerous changes had happened in these few seconds. Samsara, who had been on the back foot the whole time, were in a much better situation than before now that the 2 darkness boundaries had disappeared. Even if none of Samsara's players had been inside the darkness boundaries, it still separated them from each other. Now that this forbidden zone vanished, Samsara could finally move around freely between the 2 sides. The first thing that Fang Minghua did was step into the previous forbidden area. In the blink of an eye, only Sun Xiang remained to put pressure on Sima Cheng and Wenyi. Wu Qi's cruel silence had turned around and was moving towards Empty Waves. Because of Caio Yifen's timely interference, Zhou Zekai wasn't able to suppress Ye Xiu's Lord Grim. Once Tang Ru's soft mist made her way over, it became impossible for Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer to hold them down alone. However, the darkness boundaries were gone. Fang Minghua's laughing song and Wu Qi's cruel silence rushed over, and in an instant, Samsara splitting apart earlier looked even more beautiful. The separated empty waves had been linked back together with the team. Happy opened the match with 2 darkness boundaries to trap 4 of Samsara's players. Their opening was undoubtedly in their favor. However, despite their spectacular start, the outcome wasn't as great as they would have liked. They hadn't been able to deal much damage while their opponents had been trapped by the darkness boundary. Their plan to separate empty waves seemed like it had failed after the 2 darkness boundaries disappeared. Had Happy played it badly? No one thought so. Starting from their pincer formation, Happy's tactics had been extremely effective. Every player had performed their task outstandingly. However, Samsara's responses weren't inferior at all. They had been at an extreme disadvantage, yet they had minimized the losses. It was true that they had lost more health, but they didn't let Happy take control of the battle. Happy's crucial darkness boundaries had disappeared. Samsara began to actively take back the initiative. Zhou Zekai had been a huge reason that Samsara was able to keep things together during this period of time. Without his existence, without his strength, who knew how badly the situation would have spiraled out of control? Cloud Piercer's rapid firing was still active. However, the random firing skill duration had come to an end, reducing his firepower significantly. Samsara had finally stabilized the situation, though. The next act was now beginning. But to everyone's surprise, Zhou Zekai used dual load, instantly refreshing Cloud Piercer's random firing. He's going to keep it up. Everyone was astonished. The opening confrontation had been intense. Even though Happy wasn't able to establish an overwhelming lead, they were winning right now. Samsara's players were rather scattered about right now. It wasn't the best time to counterattack. Samsara didn't even have an immediate target to focus on. In any case, Zhou Zekai had already started. Bullets rained down again on the battlefield, except this time, Zhou Zekai no longer took care of everyone. He was unexpectedly aiming mainly towards Xiu Yifan's 1-inch ash. As he fired, he even started moving towards 1-inch ash. Xiu Yifan was clearly Zhou Zekai's target. There was Ye Xiu, who had beaten him in the 1v1. There was the all-star support Sima Cheng. There was the best rookie Tang Ru, who had just 1v3'd Samsara in the group arena. However, Zhou Zekai's target was actually Xiu Yifan. Xiu Yifan hastily had 1-inch ash dodge and retreat, but Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer wasn't letting up. When everyone looked again at this rate, the two would be separated from the rest of their teams. Could it be Box 1? Blue Rain's captain Yu Wenzhou said doubtfully. Chapter 1685, True Box 1. Chapter 1685, True Box 1. Translator, Namyami Editor. Namyami Yu Wenzhou wasn't certain. As one of Glory's 4 master tacticians, there was no way he wouldn't recognize a common tactic when he saw one. It was just that Zhou Zekai's focus towards Xiu Yifan didn't seem to fit the goals of a Box 1. The purpose of a Box 1 was to shut out the opposing team's most important player. Everyone recognized Xiu Yifan's capabilities. Happy's advantageous opening had required his darkness boundary. Ye Xiu separating Jiang Batao from the rest of Samsara had been thanks to Xiu Yifan's interference towards Zhou Zekai. He had been a crucial component in Happy's plans. But was Xiu Yifan's importance to Happy greater than Zhou Zekai's importance to Samsara? In a Box 1, the core player rarely carried it out because you would lose your own most important player. It wouldn't be an effective play. If it were core versus core, then it was sort of understandable. But with Zhou Zekai carrying out the Box 1, didn't it seem like Samsara was the one losing out? Yu Wenzhou glanced towards Xiu Shiken. Xiu Shikin glanced towards Zhang Xinji. The three master tacticians all looked at each other. In the end, no one was able to give a reason, but this was the way the match was going. Cloud Piercer chased after 1-inch Ash. With random firing and rapid firing, Cloud Piercer had been able to cover all 5 players on the enemy team. Now his focus was entirely on one target. Xiu Yifan had no way of fighting back. His only option was to run for his life. One ran, one chased. Xiu Yifan obviously didn't want to lose contact with his team, but with Zhou Zekai chasing closely after him, just being able to dodge attacks was impressive enough already. How could he have the time to pick where he wanted to go? Is Zhou Zekai planning on taking advantage of his class? Xiu Shikin suddenly thought of something and said, what was the advantage that sharpshooters had? As pro players, the answer was practically instinctive. Combined with the present situation, everyone instantly understood that Xiu Shikin must be talking about their range. Because Cloud Piercer was a long-ranged attacker, while he chased away Xiu Yifan's 1-inch Ash, he could still provide support to his other teammates. In other words, his Box 1 wasn't only to separate an important component in the opposing team's tactics. He was relying on his class's advantages to continue coordinating with his own team. Xiu Shikin also played a gunner, so he figured it out a bit faster than Yu Wenzhou, Zhang Xinji, and the other players. When everyone realized what he was saying and looked back at the match, they felt like that really was the answer. Once Xiu Yifan's 1-inch Ash was pushed far enough away, Cloud Piercer suddenly turned around and fired a few shots at Lord Grim and Soft Mist. For now, Zhou Zekai wasn't Samsara's core, but he could still help the rest of his team. His attacks towards Lord Grim and Soft Mist hadn't been random. He was perfectly in sync with his team's tempo. With Wu Qi's Cruel Silence arrival and the assistance from Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer, Jiang Batao was finally able to find an opportunity. Empty Waves used Earth Wave Slash. Mid-swing, he changed directions, turning it into a wave wheel slasher so that he could threaten both Lord Grim and Soft Mist. Although neither of the attacks landed, he was able to create an opening for himself. Retreat. Empty Waves immediately retreated. Lord Grim and Soft Mist were too close to him to the extent that even after Wu Qi's Cruel Silence joined in, Jiang Batao still felt like he was in trouble. Spellblades needed enough space to fully utilize their strengths. Although wave slashes were instant cast skills, their startup animation was slow compared to most other close-ranged skills. It was easy for spellblades to get overwhelmed at very close distances. After taking a step back, his situation became much better. For a top player like Jiang Batao, a distance of 1 step was like the difference between heaven and earth. Light Wave Slash. Empty Waves swung his sword as he retreated, using the Spellblade's fastest attack. Before, there hadn't been enough time for the attack to start up, but with a bit of distance between them, the attack would come out, and it would be too late for the other side to dodge. Light flashed. Saying that the attack arrived in the blink of an eye would be an insult to the speed of the attack. A distance of 1 step was practically non-existent. As soon as Empty Waves swung his sword, the attack landed. This wasn't something that you could react to unless you had predicted it. As a result, Jiang Batao didn't attack Lord Grim. In his eyes, Ye Xiu was more likely to predict it, so he went for Tang Ru instead. Sure enough, Tang Ru wasn't able to dodge it. But just because she wasn't able to dodge it didn't mean that she hadn't done anything. Tang Ru had reacted. After dodging Empty Waves' Earth Wave Slash and seeing Empty Waves retreat, she had reacted. It was just that her reaction wasn't to dodge Empty Waves' following attack, but to immediately give chase. Soft Mist took a step forward. She stabbed with her spear and the sword light arrived. Hit. The Light Wave Slash left a bloody mark on Soft Mist. As for Jiang Batao's Empty Waves, he had been hit by Soft Mist's spear and thrown into the air. Circle swing. It didn't matter which attack hit first. In any case, neither of them was able to interrupt the other. Soft Mist was hit by Light Wave Slash, and Empty Waves was hit by Circle Swing. Tang Ru's control over the skill wasn't affected. Empty Waves, who had just gotten away, was thrown back in the blink of an eye. Ye Xiu's Lord Grim quickly followed. He wasn't in a hurry to attack. He positioned himself so that Empty Waves was pincered by Lord Grim and Soft Mist. Wu Qi, who had been ready to rescue Jiang Badao, missed. Just like Jiang Badao, he hadn't been ready for Tang Ru's sudden attack. Cruel Silence was very close to Empty Waves, but Lord Grim and Soft Mist were closer. Not only that, the two had Empty Waves pincered. Wu Qi couldn't directly charge in. Suddenly, a gunshot. Cloud Piercer's attack came again, forcing Ye Xiu and Tang Ru turn their attention towards it. If the two dodged Cloud Piercer's attack, they would give up their positioning. Empty Waves was getting back onto his feet right when Cloud Piercer attacked. And with Ye Xiu and Tang Ru distracted for a moment, Empty Waves was able to get back up. Sure enough, the pro players were certain now. Zhou Zekai was doing what they thought. Not only was he pinning down Caio Yifan, he was also using his range to provide support to his team at crucial moments. Jiang Batao had Empty Waves get up. Wu Qi didn't miss this opportunity for Cruel Silence to attack. Along with Cloud Piercer's support, the two on Samsara quickly switched positions. Empty Waves was finally protected behind Cruel Silence. As a result, Samsara was able to relieve the pressure on Jiang Badao's Empty Waves. Ye Xiu and Tang Ru originally had a firm grasp of the situation. However, Zhou Zekai's interference had broken it. Rather than saying it's a box one, it feels more like a star tactic, Xiao Shikin said. Everyone nodded their heads. The true box one is on the other side, Zhang Xinji suddenly said. Zhang Xinji emphasized details. When he saw Zhou Zekai supporting Jiang Batao and Wu Qi again and again, he immediately realized that something wasn't right. Ye Xiu and Tang Ru weren't receiving any help at all. This was truly strange. Happy had one of Glory's best supports, Suma Cheng. Her synergy with Ye Xiu and her synergy with battle mages were second to none. Her support towards Ye Xiu and Tang Ru should be excellent. Yet where did she go? Everyone had been focused on the battle taking place on one side, but Zhang Xinji had started paying attention to the other battle long ago. Suma Cheng was being forced back by Sun Xiang. But Zhang Xinji wasn't someone who would jump to a conclusion, so he spent more time looking at the battle taking place there. Now he was completely certain. This was the place where the true box one was being carried out. Sun Xiang versus Suma Cheng. One Autumn Leaf versus Dancing Rain. Box 1. Chapter 1686. The Weakest One. Chapter 1686. The Weakest One. Translator. Namiyumi Editor. Namiyumi Happy's in a bad situation. Seeing the box one that Sun Xiang executed against Suma Cheng, the pro players came to a unified conclusion. A random map required many strategies to adapt to variable conditions, but facing an unchanging opponent, a few general strategic directions could still be established beforehand. Just like how Happy's plan to target Jiang Badao had been revealed earlier, the current situation showed Samsara's general intent when facing Happy. First, there was Ye Xiu. Last round, Samsara had tried a 3v1, but Ye Xiu had managed to hold out for a long time. So, this time, they didn't try to focus fire on Ye Xiu to take care of him quickly. Tang Ru, after completing a turnaround for Happy with her 1v3 in the group arena just now, had dealt a great blow to Samsara's morale. However, after the team round began, Samsara didn't seem to hold any fierce grudge against her or her Soft Mist. They simply fought her normally. Against Caio Yifan, Samsara sent their core player Zhou Zekai to personally restrict him. This seemed more like an on-the-spot arrangement. On one side, he restricted Caio Yifan's 1-inch ash. On the other side, he still gave powerful support to his own team. Zhou Zekai made thorough use of his class's specialty to attack in two directions at once, and Sun Xiang's box won against Sima Cheng. This seemed like a strategy that had been planned beforehand. Samsara's line of thought in this match had been to take Sima Cheng, this master of support and coordination, out of the battle. However, Samsara's strategy wasn't limited to just this. Right now, there was still another player on the battlefield, and Wenyi, Happy's healer, the cleric Little Cold Hands, was standing on the battlefield unscathed. The battle had already unfolded, but when Sun Xiang's one autumn leaf and Wu Qi's cruel silence charged toward his Little Cold Hands and Sima Cheng's dancing rain, he had already felt that something was off. He was the healer, someone who would always be an important target of attack. When these two had approached, he hurriedly retreated, seeking Sima Cheng's cover. But very quickly he realized something. Whether Sun Xiang or Wu Qi, these two characters seemed to be entirely focused on attacking Sima Cheng's dancing rain. He healed from the side. He used a few of the cleric's controlling techniques from the side, but those two people were simply on guard against his interference, nothing more. Their full attention was on Sima Cheng. If not for these two pincering her, how could Sima Cheng have been pinned down so easily? It was because of Wu Qi's help that Sun Xiang had been able to successfully establish a box one against Sima Cheng. And at that moment, Wu Qi had run back to help Jiang Bata without a glance back, and Wenyi had already been feeling that something was wrong. At this, his fingertips grew cold. He saw Samsara's strategy, including Samsara's attitude toward him. All this time, because he had been viewed as Happy's weak point, he had often become the opponent's target of attack during the team round. Happy had performed many strategies to take advantage of this. But today, in this battle that would determine to whom the championship would belong, and Wenyi suddenly discovered that he was disregarded. And Wenyi was always calm and logical, but this time, his emotional state suffered a blow. View him as the weak point, he accepted it. He admitted that his skill was insufficient, even among the batch of rookies in Happy, let alone the pro circle as a whole. But now, Samsara's attitude wasn't just treating him as the weak point. They were completely and wholly ignoring him. When Sun Xiang and Wu Qi's characters closed in, they came only toward Sima Cheng without sparing him half a glance. Right now, his Little Cold Hands was only standing there. He had no protection of any sort, but Samsara had no intention of attacking him. This attitude was simply expressing his existence didn't matter. His cleric simply could not affect the final outcome of this battle. Were they looking down on him? Or was this really the only value he had? When he'd been treated as the weak point, he could still draw the opponent's attacks, and from there become the center of a trap for the opponent. But now, in the eyes of the mighty Samsara, was he really nothing? And Wenyi's hands were cold, and his heart grew cold as well. He knew his shortcomings. He knew that he might not have any talent, but he hadn't given up. He had kept working hard. Even when he was the weak point known to all, he had used his identity as the weak point to contribute to the team. He appeared calm only because he was logical, only because he clearly recognized his own ability and limits. He did not resign himself to this fate. He had been working hard all this time so that he would no longer be viewed as the weak point. And so he'd had a few shining performances, not as the bait or the trap, but as a cleric. He had even earned the recognition and praise of his idol, Glory's #1 cleric Zhang Xinji. This Letin Wenyi felt that his hard work hadn't been for nothing. Perhaps he was no longer the weak point, perhaps he would soon be able to shine. But now that didn't seem to be the case. In the eyes of Samsara, this strongest team in the alliance, he wasn't even considered the weak point. He was no more than a worthless piece of trash. No one could know the sheer loss in Wenyi's heart right now. He had been working hard all this time, but in the end, was the difference between him and everyone else really still so large? Had his so-called improvement been no more than wishful thinking? In reality, was he still that most useless one? Something's wrong with Happy's healer. Once again, it was Zhang Xinji who would observe every detail on the battlefield who noticed first. Right now, neither Samsara's Fang Minghua nor Happy's and Wenyi had encountered any harassment. But it was for different reasons. Happy was currently unable to spare any hands to target the healer, while Samsara was purposely ignoring Happy's healer. All of the pro players could see this quite clearly. It seems like he doesn't know what he should do, Thunderclap's Zio Shikin said, after observing Little Cold Hand's actions. All this time, he struggled to survive under high pressure. Today, now that Samsara's ignoring him, does he not know what to do? Tiny Herb's Wang Jixi tried to figure out in Wenyi's current mood. None of them correctly guessed in Wenyi's mood, because these god-level players had never met this kind of treatment before. The weak point, the flaw, the dead last, these descriptions had never been associated with them. Those who could feel that distress in Wenyi's heart right now were only those who had experienced what he had, those who'd been ignored, who'd been treated coldly, who hadn't been valued. Wind Howl's Tang Hao was smiling bitterly. This disregard from Samsara put him in a particularly bad mood. Blue Rain's Captain Yu Wenzhou also sighed and said, "He suffered a psychological blow." A psychological blow. Many of them exchanged glances. It was inevitable that Happy would be somewhat lacking on technique or strategy. But psychologically on this team, the old and the young, the strong and the weak, they were all demons. When had they ever revealed any kind of psychological problems? Samsara's given in Wenyi a fatal blow, Yu Wenzhou said. What do you mean? A number of people asked. Denied his worth once and for all, said Yu Wenzhou. Denied in Wenyi's worth once and for all. Everyone's gazes returned to the battlefield, as the situation on the battlefield grew more and more intense. Happy had already been at a disadvantage, and the performance of their healer was currently unusually clumsy. This kind of performance was the so-called pig teammate, more terrible than a godly opponent. There is a problem, and it can only be mental, many people said, nodding. And Wenyi's skill wasn't anything special, but in this kind of situation where there was no interference, his judgment and accurate grasp of timing combined with the high intelligence and high crit stats of Little Cold Hands should be enough to serve as Happy's most solid backing. But now, it seemed as though he'd lost his mind, that he had no idea what the thought process of a battle should be. A psychological problem was always a big problem, especially for those who always seemed to be very psychologically strong, who never had any problems. As soon as a problem did appear, then it would be even more difficult to deal with. And Wenyi lacked self-confidence because he was too logical. He logically recognized that his strength still wasn't enough, and that he therefore shouldn't have self-confidence. Carefully, bit by bit, he'd built up his confidence. But now in this battle, the final battle, the battle that would determine everything, Samsara's total disregard shattered the confidence that he had so carefully raised. It destroyed all of those hopes he'd had for himself, hopes that had been born with such difficulty. By now, he had no idea how to continue. He needed to help. Hey! At this moment, a message appeared in Team Happy's chat. Hurry and heal. It was Ye Xiu speaking. It looked like he was just reminding Wenyi to keep up with the tempo. Don't think too much. It's true, you're not very exceptional. Who would have thought that Ye Xiu would suddenly send another sentence? This kind of sentence appearing at a moment like this. In the eyes of any pro player, this was practically cooperating with the psychological knives that Samsara was throwing. This guy is insane. Is this considered curing poison with poison? Everyone was shouting. But a transition appeared. Even if you're a piece of straw when you're tied to a deluxe mitten crab, then you have the worth of that crab. Everyone was stunned. These words seemed to have some philosophy to them. It was just that this metaphor, it seemed a bit self-inflating. What the mitten crab in the metaphor referred to couldn't be clearer. This guy, he was simply too shameless. Did he know how to be humble? But when he saw these words, he too was taken aback. That was right. No matter how worthless he was, he had a group of beautiful teammates at his side. Relying upon their light, even if he could reflect only a little bit of it, he would be bright enough that he couldn't be ignored, right? My skill isn't as good as your healer's, and my control of the situation definitely cannot compare to that of your experienced and thoughtful Fang Minghua. But even if what I can do is only 1/10 of what your Fang Minghua can, even if you think it's a negligible, insignificant 10%, what if our happy only needs that 10%? No need for doubt, no need for confusion. He only needed to do all that he could do, and the rest of it he would leave to his teammates. What was he thinking about? Had he gotten too used to being treated as the weak point? Did he think that he was the core that the opponent needed to take care of? That had never been the case. He had always been no more than the weakest player in Happy. That had always been the case. The fortunate thing was he had a group of amazing teammates. Chapter 1687, The Weakling's Counterattack. Chapter 1687, The Weakling's Counterattack. Translator, Namyami. Editor, Namyami. No matter how bad I am, I'm Happy's healer. And when he regained his calm, regained his reason, he quickly observed the present situation. Things weren't going well for Happy. Everyone on the team had been separated. Even Suma Cheng's dancing rain with her ultra-long range had lost contact with the team. Which side needed the most help? And when he immediately examined each of the battles taking place. Suma Cheng's dancing rain was pinned down by Sun Xiang's one autumn leaf. Even if he tried to help, a launcher would have a hard time forcefully breaking past a battle mage. What about Ye Xiu and Tang Ru? It was a 2v2 against Jiang Batao and Wu Qi. Jiang Batao's empty waves had escaped from their grasps. Wu Qi had joined up with him, and now the two sides were going back and forth. For a moment, neither side seemed to be able to gain the upper hand. However, behind Jiang Batao and Wu Qi was Fang Minghua's laughing song, who was providing support to them. Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer would also help from time to time. In the long term, it seemed like he would be needed there. However, and Wenyi didn't immediately go over to help. He turned towards Caio Yifen's 1-inch ash. Although Suma Cheng was pinned down by Sun Xiang, the one in the worst shape was actually Caio Yifen. Caio Yifen had no way to use any of his skills. Ghost boundaries had cast times. Without any place to hide, any attempts to place down a ghost boundary would be interrupted. Zhou Zekai wouldn't let him out of his sight. With random firing and rapid firing active, the previous wave of attacks had sent 1-inch ash fleeing like a mouse. The duration of those two skills had ended, but Zhou Zekai was still keeping Caio Yifen in check. Anytime 1-inch ash tried to swing his sword, a bullet would fly his way. Caio Yifen was helpless. He could only keep moving while searching for an opening or a place for him to hide. However, Zhou Zekai never let up. If 1-inch ash moved, he would move too. Utilizing the sharpshooter's range, Cloud Piercer had an exceptional radius of defense. Against many classes, this defense would appear somewhat lacking, but for a spell-based class like a phantom demon, it was more than enough. Caio Yifen needs help. Seeing 1-inch ash struggling to break free from Cloud Piercer's pursuit, and Wenyi reached a conclusion. As a result, and Wenyi's little cold hands started moving. What is he thinking? The pro players had seen Ye Xiu's words to Wenyi, but they didn't know how much help those words would be to Wenyi. When they saw little cold hands suddenly start moving, they had no idea what he was thinking. It didn't seem like he was trying to reach a place where he could cast spells. As little cold hands approached his target, everyone started to see Cloud Piercer, and Wenyi's little cold hands was actually charging straight towards Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer. What is he thinking? Everyone was dumbfounded. Wasn't this upside down? The weakling that Samsara had chosen to ignore was actually running towards Samsara's greatest, most dazzling player. Had he gone insane? Is he planning on giving up his life to block the bullets? Someone guessed. And when he had done this many times in previous matches, the other teams would regard their healer as the target that needed the most protection. On the other hand, Happy would sometimes throw their healer out to the wolves to act as a meat shield. What's wrong with that? The healer's job is to protect the team. Tyranny's Zhang Xinji said, "True, protect the team." Everyone understood the healer's responsibility, but was this sort of method really that effective? Zhou Zekai just needed to turn his attention to him for a second to stop him, no. And Wenyi obviously understood this reality. This was also why he chose to charge directly towards Cloud Piercer. Ignoring me? Fine. I'm going to run at you, so keep on ignoring me. And Wenyi thought to himself. He wasn't sulking, though. It was a logical decision. He was certain that by doing this, he would lure away Zhou Zekai's attention, switch targets to him, stop him from approaching. All of those could happen, but Wenyi believed firmly that if Zhou Zekai had Cloud Piercer aim his guns at him, Kaio Yifan, Ye Xiu, and Tang Ru would definitely seize this window of opportunity to do something. This was the way he survived in Happy. This was the way he survived in the pro scene. If it was just his healing, then there was only so much he could contribute. He needed to do other things to make up for his lack of skill, such as using his own character's health. The crowd began letting out cries of surprise. Happy's weakest member was actually running straight into the jaws of Samsara's strongest, and he was a healer too. What is he thinking? Is he trying to kill himself? The viewers had begun to notice, and so had the players on the battlefield. This guy, Fang Minghua, was a healer, and he needed to keep his eyes and ears open at all times. As a result, he was the first to notice Wenyi's surprising movements. At first, he thought that Wenyi was acting like a child throwing a tantrum. Seeing how Samsara was ignoring him, Wenyi was using this sort of method to force Samsara to pay attention to him. But when he looked closer, he saw how steadily Little Cold Hands was moving. He saw how Little Cold Hands would look around from time to time. It made him realize that this definitely wasn't him acting like a child. And Wenyi had made this decision in an attempt to turn the situation around. What is he planning? Little Cold Hands hadn't done anything yet, but Kaio Yifan's 1-inch ash suddenly acted. Move. He had been moving constantly, but after taking these 2 steps, when Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer adjusted his aim, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. Little Cold Hands. Zhou Zekai ignored him. It was just a cleric. Even if he got closer, he was no threat. Step to the side. Cloud Piercer stepped to the side, opening his vision again, and fired. Bang! A bullet flew out. Little Cold Hands also followed and stepped to the side. Too slow, Zhou Zekai saw Little Cold Hands and figured out Wenyi's intentions, but he knew what Wenyi's weakness was. He knew that his reaction speed and technique were lacking. As a result, if he moved and then attacked, Wenyi wouldn't be able to keep up. Sure enough. When Little Cold Hands moved to the side, the bullet had already been fired and it went right past him. But there was no 1-inch ash in Zhou Zekai's line of sight. Moved to the side again. Zhou Zekai found a new angle and attacked again. Wenyi's Little Cold Hands followed along again, but nothing changed. His reaction speed wasn't fast enough to keep up. However, Zhou Zekai was frowning. Even though Wenyi failed to block his attack, even though Kaio Yifan's 1-inch ash still wasn't able to place down a ghost boundary, Wenyi was still an additional burden for Zhou Zekai, requiring him to put in extra effort. It was as if there was a moving obstacle between Cloud Piercer and 1-inch ash now. Zhou Zekai had no choice but to expend more energy to avoid this obstacle. Switch targets and kill Little Cold Hands. That was what most people were thinking he should do. However, if he did that, his attention would mainly be focused on Little Cold Hands. Kaio Yifan would likely seize this opportunity to escape. Things weren't so simple. If someone else could keep Xiu Yifen pinned down, then it wouldn't take him long to get rid of that pesky cleric. But there was no one, because he had forced Xiu Yifen's 1-inch ash away from everyone else. He was the only one nearby that could keep him under control. This separation had originally been his advantage, but right now it was being used against him. Once you ride a tiger, it's hard to get off, and the one who put him in this situation was Happy's weakest member, the one Samsara had decided to ignore. And Weni, little cold hands, regardless, this situation could not continue. He had to get rid of him, even if it meant giving Xiu Yifen an opening. There was nothing else he could do. Just when Zhou Zekai was about to act, a figure suddenly slammed into little cold hands from the side. Laughing Song. Fang Minghua's Laughing Song, Samsara's cleric, had unexpectedly brandished his cross and charged straight into little cold hands. Was this a fight between clerics? Everyone was dumbfounded. What sort of match was this? What was going on with these two teams' healers? One of them ran straight towards the jaws of the enemy, while the other ran over to swing his cross. Was that really the only way? The viewers were a bit puzzled. This was supposed to be a match of the highest level, so why was it looking like a match of the lowest level? Zhou Zekai let out a sigh of relief. Fang Minghua had noticed his predicament, seeing that Zhou Zekai was having trouble because of little cold hands. Take over and pin down Xiu Yifen's 1-inch ash. Fang Minghua's Laughing Song wasn't capable of doing that, but he could contend against little cold hands. Both of them were clerics who didn't have much combat capabilities. But if it was a 1v1, Fang Minghua felt like he should have the upper hand against an Weni no. Thus, in the finals that represented the highest level of pro play, the strange scene of two clerics whacking each other appeared. No skills were used. It was just the two of them swinging their crosses, using normal attacks to beat each other up. It wasn't that clerics didn't have crowd control skills. It was just that with an Weni's determination and caution, Fang Minghua felt like this was the most reliable method. Chapter 1688, Heroic Leap. Chapter 1688. Heroic Leap. Translator. Namyami. Editor. Namyami. How did it turn into two clerics beating each other up? This scene could occasionally be seen in the game, usually when players were bored, but it was unheard of in pro play. There were times when healers were forced to fight, but those were out of helplessness for self-defense. However, this was likely the first time a cleric had intentionally rushed in to attack another cleric. When a cross swung, there would be a sound effect as well. This sound seemed incredibly unfamiliar to everyone's ears. Laughing Song, Little Cold Hands. The two clerics traded blows. The two characters happened to be male and female, an almost tragic sight to witness, like a family fight in the streets. Who studied how to fight at close combat as a cleric. Even Fang Minghua, who was an experienced player, hadn't. And Weni didn't need to be said. Although he had been scouted from the game with his rational mind, he never participated in something as boring as a cleric brawl, let alone studied it. Pipipi, papapa. The crosses flashed with white light, weaving back and forth, occasionally colliding. A rain of white light poured down, pelting the two clerics. However, their health barely moved. They were clerics. How much attack power could they have? Fang Minghua was starting to feel a bit of regret. He was regretting how he had used Charge to get close. Charge was a knight skill. Because it was a pre-advancement priest skill, he could also learn it. Using it to attack wasn't something a cleric wanted to use it for. After all, it was an effective skill for movement and escaping. And because of this, no priest class would let go of this skill. It had become a habit for Fang Minghua. He had needed to get to Nweni quickly, so he had instinctively used the skill. Now that he and Nweni were fighting, he realized how useful Charge would have been now. I'm not experienced enough. Fang Minghua didn't have any experience closing in on an opponent and attacking. But just when he remembered Charge, he suddenly realized, not good. Laughing Song had used Charge, but what about Little Cold Hands? He hadn't seen Little Cold Hands use it. Just when he had this thought, he immediately saw Little Cold Hands pause charge. Bang! Little Cold Hands lowered his head, ready to ram into Laughing Song. The cross looked completely useless in his hands. Although it was clearly an attack skill, it looked like he was making a fool of himself. But no matter how stupid it looked, it was a charge, and one at a very close distance to the target. Laughing Song was suddenly sent flying, but Little Cold Hands didn't stop. He was unexpectedly chasing after Laughing Song. Had he gotten addicted to the thrill of close combat? No, that wasn't the reason. Little Cold Hands had his charge off cooled on the entire time, but Wenyi didn't immediately use it. He had been waiting for an opportunity. Finding the right timing was Wenyi's specialty. Even if Fang Minghua had been ready for it since the start, stopping Little Cold Hands from using it wouldn't have been so easy. Laughing Song was sent flying. Little Cold Hands rushed out. His direction, Cloud Piercer. And Wenyi hadn't forgotten his original intention. He hadn't come here to fight the enemy cleric. He had come to interfere with Zhou Zekai. He had come to create opportunities for his team. He had come to turn things around so that the team could win. Fang Minghua had relieved the pressure from Zhou Zekai, allowing him to continue controlling the battlefield. Zhou Zekai had wanted to provide some assistance to Fang Minghua, but before the appropriate opportunity came, Fang Minghua's Laughing Song shot towards his Cloud Piercer like a bullet. It had been too sudden. Zhou Zekai hastily had Cloud Piercer dodge to the side, but then he saw Little Cold Hands following close behind, rushing towards him with charge. Ah! At this instant, countless people shrieked. And Wenyi, Little Cold Hands, this flimsy cleric had unexpectedly attacked Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer. That bastard, it'd probably be the greatest achievement in his career. But no, Zhou Zekai's reaction speed was incomparably quick. His hand speed was even quicker. He had been getting out of Laughing Song's way when he suddenly noticed Little Cold Hands. At that point, Little Cold Hands had practically reached him already, yet he had actually been able to react in time. Bang, 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 bang. Cloud Piercer fired his dual guns, using the recoil to increase his speed. In the end, he was able to avoid the charge. How close! Zhou Zekai felt a cold sweat dripping down his back. If the charge had hit him, his tempo would have been disrupted. Now it was still fine. Even though it would be a bit troublesome, he could still keep things in control. While he had been dodging, he had looked around, particularly at Caio Yifen's side. Sure enough, Caio Yifen had seized this opportunity to start casting a ghost boundary. Cloud Piercer had only barely dodged the attack from Little Cold Hands. His balance wasn't the best, but Zhou Zekai was confident. Even in this situation, he could accurately hit 1-inch Ash in the chest. Aim! He lifted his gun. Cloud Piercer readied the trigger when a shadow suddenly descended from the sky. In this shadow's hands was a white light, dim and insignificant. Yet at this moment this white light was invincible. Heroic leap. And Wenyi saw that his charge would miss, so he cancelled it and turned around. Heroic leap. And Wenyi knew that his reaction speed was slow. He knew that his hands weren't quick. But at this instant, he put everything he had to be as fast as possible. He was pushing himself to his limits. He didn't even know if what he was doing was accurate or if he would hit his opponent. Heroic leap. This was the skill that Wenyi had placed on Little Cold Hands' weapon. The skill name was mighty, but Wenyi knew that the purpose of this skill wasn't its might. It was similar to charge. It was supposed to give Little Cold Hands another escape tool. However, right now, he wasn't running away. He wasn't trying to survive. His Little Cold Hands swung his cross, using Heroic Leap to smash into Cloud Piercer, smash into Glory's #1 player, smash that being high above him. If he could hit him, it would probably be his greatest achievement. And Wenyi didn't object at all to this point. This moment was indeed the greatest highlight of his career. Heroic leap. Little Cold Hands jumped up. Little Cold Hands fell. The feeble light knocked down Joe Zekai's cloud piercer, this existence at glory's summit. At this moment, little cold hands had cloud piercer beneath his feet. Chapter 1689, A Change in Situation. Chapter 1689, A Change in Situation. Translator, Namiyami. Editor, Namiyami, what is this? What just happened? Everyone watching the match suddenly heard a hoarse shout from Pan Lin. It sounded like he wanted to crawl out and grab the audience's neck to get to the bottom of this matter. Even so, no one felt like he had lost his composure, because they were all going crazy just like him. A cleric knocking down a sharpshooter. More importantly, the sharpshooter was Cloud Piercer, controlled by Joe Zekai, Glory's #1 player in recent years. Even if that was just context, it was a powerful scene, placing him in the spotlight. Everyone knew that even if and when he wasn't a great player, even if he was considered one of the worst among Happy's rookies, what he had contributed today would be remembered for years. This scene was similar to Tyranny's assassin, Cold Seasons, from many years ago. He wasn't a particularly well-known player, but his shattering life-risking strike against one autumn leaf in the finals became the most breathtaking moment that year. And Wenny's attack wasn't anything special, but his little cold hands was a cleric knocking down Glory's #1 player. This was more than enough for this moment to be written into the annals of Glory. Although to be accurate, Cloud Piercer hadn't been knocked down. After all, heroic leap wasn't a skill with a forced knockdown. Joe Zekai hadn't been able to avoid the attack in time, but it wasn't hard for him to quick recover and avoid crashing into the ground. But whether or not he really did get knocked down wasn't important. With quick recover, Cloud Piercer would roll and then get up. In everyone's eyes, Cloud Piercer rolling on the ground was no different than little cold hands sending him tumbling with a heroic leap. Apart from the staunch Samsara supporters, this moment made everyone's blood boil with excitement. But not Joe Zekai. Many people might think of this as humiliating to him, but he had no such thoughts. No matter how weak and when he was an opponent. It was just that from his skill level and his class, he should have been someone easy to deal with. But this time, this opponent had made the right decision at the right time. In that instant, he hadn't been weak at all. But it was only for an instant. Joe Zekai still didn't think Wenny was much of a threat. Even when little cold hands had hit him with heroic leap, what he had cared more about was interrupting 1-inch Ash. I need to hurry and interrupt him again. This was the more urgent matter in Joe Zekai's mind. Roll, find the target, aim. Before Cloud Piercer even got up, Joe Zekai had started preparing for his next attack. But he was too late. On the battlefield, only an instant was needed to make a difference. From start to finish, and Wenny hadn't been able to gain the upper hand on Joe Zekai, but in that instant he had won. He had won his team an opportunity. Kaio Yifen's 1-inch Ash had already walked to the necessary position and had started casting a ghost boundary. If Cloud Piercer had been able to get off his shot previously, he would have been able to interrupt 1-inch Ash. But it was too late to try now. The spell was complete. The ghostly power gathered around 1-inch Ash's blade, Snow Stripe. By the time the gunshot rang, 1-inch Ash had already swung his sword. Even though the others on Samsara had their own battles to take care of, they would pay attention to the changes going on in the battlefield from time to time. Seeing that Cloud Piercer wasn't able to interrupt 1-inch Ash in time, they knew that a ghost boundary would be completed soon. Jiang Batao and Wu Qi began to retreat in haste. Ha, it's a feint. Outside of the match, Ye Xiu laughed. In that instant, Ye Xiu was able to tell that 1-inch Ash had hidden a little trick when he placed down the ghost boundary. Only someone like Ye Xiu, Glory's #1 phantom demon, could have noticed it. Sure enough, the moment the tip of the blade reached the bottom of its arc, it suddenly turned. Dense ghostly energy filled with a chilly frost blossomed like a pale blue flower. Ice boundary. In the center was one autumn leaf. At the final moment, Xiu Yifan, who had originally been pointing towards empty waves and cruel silence, turned towards one autumn leaf. It wasn't that Sun Xiang hadn't noticed that Xiu Yifan was setting down a ghost boundary. It was just that Xiu Yifan's feint hadn't been so easy to see through. Only Li Xuan had been able to. When he saw the direction of the ice boundary, as well as Jiang Batao's empty waves and Wu Qi's cruel silence retreating, Sun Xiang more or less disregarded it. By the time Xiu Yifan made the change, it was too late for him to react in time. The biting cold instantly slowed one autumn leaf. Not being directly turned into an ice cube was already quite lucky. Pooh! 1-inch ash was struck by the bullet. In order to place down the ice boundary, there was no way Xiu Yifan could have dodged it. Cloud Piercer had only been just a little bit too late. It looked as if it had hit 1-inch ash before the ghost boundary had been set down. Blood spurted out from the wound, but it was meaningless. And Wenyi had created an opening for Xiu Yifan, and Xiu Yifan had used it to alter the flow of the match. Dancing rain rushed out. Sun Xiang wanted to stop her, but one autumn leaf was now too slow to catch up to her. Boom, boom, boom. Glory's #1 support started firing artillery shells around the battlefield. She was finally doing what she was best at, supporting. Artillery shells flew towards Jiang Batao's empty waves and Wu Qi's cruel silence. The flames from the explosions flashed in front of their eyes. When 1-inch ash turned his blade, the two realized that they had been tricked. The two hastily tried to get back, but the players on Happy weren't wooden trees. The two of them had given up their position to avoid the ghost boundary, so Happy immediately had someone occupy it. Tang Ru, soft mist. A battle mage fighting up close, while a launcher supported from afar. A familiar combo. Many people's thoughts immediately returned to those former days. Even though the duo hadn't been able to win the championships, the two were the greatest partners in all of Glory. But now, one autumn leaf had become Dancing Rain's enemy. The one playing the battle mage was different. As for Suma Cheng's former partner, Ye Xiu, he was Happy's true lead and Happy's true core. No one dared to overlook him, whether it was the enemy players or the viewers watching. Even when the rising stars of Happy shined again and again, those familiar with Ye Xiu would always pay attention to his each and every move. If there were no opportunities, he could create opportunities for himself. And Wenyi had helped Happy win the team an opening. Would Ye Xiu keep biding his time? Would Ye Xiu not do anything? Of course not. Tang Ru had been left to deal with Jiang Batao and Wu Qi alone. At this moment, Ye Xiu turned fire. Gunshots rang continuously. Zhou Zekai hadn't been able to interrupt Xiu Yifan in time. When he saw Xiu Yifan's feint muddle Jiang Batao's and Wu Qi's tempo, he realized that the previous situation could no longer continue. With one autumn leaf trapped in the ice boundary, the box one would certainly fail. The situation had changed, which meant that he needed to hurry and adjust. He needed to find a new breakthrough point. As a result, Zhou Zekai set his sights on a target close to him, and Wenyi's little cold hands. Ultimately, he was Happy's healer. No matter how amazing he had been previously, a cleric was someone who the team needed to protect, who knew how many strategies had been devised over the years to get to the enemy healer. Right now, Happy's healer was standing right near Cloud Piercer without anyone to protect him. Let alone the fact that Zhou Zekai's sharpshooter could even fight evenly against Ye Xiu's unspecialized in close combat. Even if he couldn't, a cleric should lose to a sharpshooter anyways. At that moment he fired again, this time towards Little Cold Hands. Gunshot, blood. The white robe on Little Cold Hands was dyed red. Others might think that this was a form of revenge from Zhou Zekai, but in reality it wasn't. The enemy healer had gifted himself over, so why shouldn't he attack him? It was the rational thing to do. Chapter 1690. The Warrior Shining Like a Shooting Star. Chapter 1690. The Warrior Shining Like a Shooting Star. Translator. Namyami Editor. Namyami, whoever controlled the enemy healer, controlled the battle. These words were a common saying in glory. The team competition revolved around attacking and defending the healer. Compared to fighting for wild bosses in the game, even more strategic and tactical complexities were involved. The difficulty of wild bosses was mainly due to the sheer number of players involved. However, on the pro stage, everything needed to be far more precise. In this team competition, both sides had taken unconventional routes. Happy chose to target Jiang Badao's empty waves. They didn't seem to show any particular attention towards Fang Minghua's laughing song. As for Samsara, their attack towards Happy's healer wasn't tactical, it was psychological. For a time, their method had been effective. However, Wenyi was quickly brought back by Ye Xiu. Then, he violated everything a healer should do, and brought Happy back from a disadvantage. However, the price he paid was completely exposing himself to Zhou Zekai and Cloud Piercer's dual guns. With the enemy healer sitting right there out in the open, Zhou Zekai didn't mind changing the team's original strategy of ignoring him to killing him. Strategy and tactics had to be adjusted according to the circumstances. And Wenyi had predicted this outcome when he took the risk. He obviously tried to run, but Zhou Zekai didn't give him a chance. Once Cloud Piercer failed to interrupt 1-inch Ash, he immediately shifted his attention to Wenyi's Little Cold Hands. As he attacked Little Cold Hands, he didn't forget to be wary of 1-inch Ash behind him. At the same time, he also checked how the rest of his team was doing. Tang Ru's soft mist rushed forward, ready for a 1v2. Ye Xiu's Lord Grim pulled away and turned around. He's coming. Zhou Zekai saw everything clearly. He had predicted that Happy wasn't going to give up on their healer so easily. From the looks of it, the rescue would be coming from Happy's strongest force. If Ye Xiu's Lord Grim got close to him, not only would Little Cold Hands be saved, his control over 1-inch Ash would drop drastically. By then, Lord Grim and 1-inch Ash would form a team, and he would be the one in a predicament. Fortunately, while Happy had sent aid for Little Cold Hands, Samsara didn't leave Zhou Zekai alone to fend for himself. Sun Xiang's one autumn leaf had been slowed by the ice boundary, but he was able to leave the ice boundary in the end. Because of Zhou Zekai's interference, Kaio Yifen's 1-inch Ash wasn't able to set up any other ghost boundaries. After walking out from the ice boundary, one autumn leaf's movements were back to normal. However, it was no longer possible for him to continue shutting down Dancing Rain. Much of the success for the box one was because of Wu Qi's help. The two of them had teamed together to quickly shut down Suma Cheng. Now, Wu Qi was no longer there to help. With just Sun Xiang's one autumn leaf alone, it wasn't easy for him to seal off Suma Cheng's Dancing Rain. Suma Cheng was very experienced with these sorts of situations. Sending just one player alone to deal with her would likely end up with Suma Cheng kiting, while she continued to support the rest of the team. Sun Xiang knew how challenging it would be to face Suma Cheng, and given the present situation, he couldn't waste any more time. Charge. This time, one autumn leaf didn't target his former partner, but rather his former owner. Ye Xiu, Lord Grim. Sun Xiang wanted to stop Ye Xiu from interfering with Zhou Zekai. If he could stall long enough for Zhou Zekai to finish off Happy's healer, victory was theirs. But Lord Grim turned around and switched targets. Lord Grim had been rushing to Little Cold Hands' aid. But as soon as he saw one autumn leaf running towards him, he immediately gave up on his original plan and ran away towards a different direction. Swish, swish. Two movement skills came out in quick succession. Countless people's eyes were still on the afterimages left behind by Lord Grim. However, for Fang Minghua in front of him was the real Lord Grim. Laughing Song had previously gone to fight against Little Cold Hands, but he had been sent flying by Little Cold Hands' charge. By the time he steadied himself, Little Cold Hands had sent Cloud Piercer tumbling along the ground. But similar to Zhou Zekai, Fang Minghua didn't let this scene cloud his judgment. He also didn't feel much threat from little cold hands. The attack had indeed been impactful, though. The entire flow of the match could potentially reset. What came after was as he expected. Starting from when Cloud Piercer failed to interrupt 1-inch Ash's ice boundary, the situation changed. Sima Cheng was finally able to escape from the box 1 Jiang Batao, and Wu Qi had their tempos disrupted from 1-inch Ash's feint. But the key to the match is still in our hands. Fang Minghua had also noticed little cold hands. That attack had helped Happy change the situation, but at the same time, he was now a lamb in a tiger's den. Whoever controlled the enemy healer controlled the battle. Fang Minghua trusted that Zhou Zekai wouldn't forget such a critical point in the heat of the moment. Even though he was at the top of glory, he would never forget about the fundamentals. Zhou Zekai didn't let him down. His reaction was even faster than he had hoped. He only fired at 1-inch Ash once before focusing on little cold hands. Fang Minghua could see that little cold hand's back was already dyed with blood. This is how it should be. Fang Minghua felt much calmer. He immediately began doing what he was supposed to do. But then, he saw Lord Grimm. Lord Grimm had originally rushed over to little cold hand's aid, but when one autumn leaf also rushed over to intercept him, he suddenly changed directions. Fang Minghua faintly realized something as Laughing Song began to run, but Lord Grimm was too quick. In the blink of an eye, Lord Grimm sealed off his escape route. So that was his true aim. Fang Minghua felt a shudder in his heart. Rescue little cold hands. No, Ye Xiu's goal had been him from the very beginning. Little cold hands was bait to lure away Zhou Zekai and Sun Xiang. Who did Laughing Song have to protect him? No one. Jiang Batao, Wu Qi, Sun Xiang, none of them could help him. The only one who could help was Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer. However, little cold hands was stuck by his side. He couldn't contend against Cloud Piercer, but by sticking to his side, even just sticking his hands out and waving them around would be a form of interference. This is a trade. Fang Minghua discovered that Wenyi had already given up on himself. He had no plans on surviving. He had barely healed anyone. Instead, he used this simple and crude method to cling onto Cloud Piercer. Happy's weakest to stop Samsara's strongest. Was that Happy's strategy? Was this Tian Jai's horse race? Then, by using the opportunity that Wenyi opened up, Happy would attack Laughing Song and both healers would be eliminated. Fang Minghua knew that Happy was more than willing to trade healers. He wasn't being conceited. He was no doubt superior to Wenyi as a healer. He had this confidence. In fact, every pro healer would have this confidence. That was why Samsara had intentionally ignored Wenyi, because even if Wenyi was given free rein, he wouldn't do better than Fang Minghua. In Samsara's eyes, there was no risk to doing this. How could they have expected Wenyi to not be a healer when he was given free rein? He unexpectedly became an attacker, an extraordinarily weak attacker. Samsara ignoring him suddenly became his stage to shine. Unfortunately, his attack was like a shooting star. In just a flash, it faded away. But in the end, he was able to change the situation. Then, Happy seemed to no longer have any use for him. Happy was clear that in a battle of healers, Wenyi would lose to Fang Minghua. As a result, they abandoned him to trade for Fang Minghua. Today, little cold hand's identity as a healer was a bait. He shone brilliantly for an instant before fading away, and by doing this, he was going to drag down Samsara's healer with him. I won't let you have your way. Fang Minghua had Laughing Song retreat to get as much distance between himself and Lord Grimm. His teammates had noticed what was going on. They would certainly try and help him. They knew that this trade wasn't worth it. It wasn't just the difference in value between healers. Without Fang Minghua, Samsara had no healer. However, without Wenyi, Happy still had Ye Xiu and his Lord Grimm. Lord Grimm's healing capabilities weren't great, and as the team's main attacker, Ye Xiu couldn't sacrifice too many of his offensive stats to strengthen Lord Grimm's healing. He might not be a great healer, but he could heal at crucial moments, which could potentially save a life. In terms of technique, while every pro healer could dare to say that they were better than Wenyi, no would dare to say they were better than Ye Xiu. Stall and wait for help. This was Fang Minghua's plan. He had a skill ready to be used as Lord Grimm closed in. Fang Minghua could feel his palms sweat. He knew Ye Xiu's terror, which meant that he was even more careful with how he timed this skill. Angel's Might, a paladin skill, a forced knockback that ignored super armor. Fang Minghua wanted to rely on this skill to win more time for his steam, but he needed to get the timing right. He was afraid that if he used it too early, it might not be effective, or Lord Grimm might interrupt him. He stared closely at Lord Grimm, and started attacking him from afar. Fang Minghua tried his best to dodge as he endured and waited. It's time, now, Angel's Might. It was only level 1, but in an instant the divine protection flashed around Laughing Song and quickly spread. But Lord Grimm vanished. There was no shadow clone. It wasn't shadow clone technique. There was no trace of magic. It wasn't teleport. Even if he used those movement skills, he might not be able to escape. Those were displacement skills, but Angel's Might was an Aeon. No. Where did he go? Fang Minghua felt a chill. He suddenly realized a possibility. In the center of the spreading light, Lord Grimm tunneled through the earth from beneath Laughing Song. Ninjutsu underground tunneling technique. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com Chapter 1691. Flexibility Chapter 1691. Flexibility Translator. Namiyami Editor. Namiyami Peng. Laughing Song's neck was split open. Lord Grimm had given a solid cut. But no matter how bad it looked, since this was a level 1 skill, its damage wasn't high. The purpose of the skill wasn't the damage, though. Lord Grimm had used the underground effect to avoid Angel's Might, allowing him to close the distance on Laughing Song. Not good. Fang Minghua immediately thought. In reality, Laughing Song was still quite healthy, and although the enemy ace had closed in on him, it wasn't a fatal situation. His team could still rescue him. Fang Minghua understood this reasoning, but he couldn't control the sense of crisis rising in his heart. It was as if Lord Grimm had given Laughing Song a fatal blow. This was pressure. Even if he had won 2 championships, when Ye Xiu's Lord Grimm got close, Fang Minghua could still feel the stifling pressure bearing down on him. He wanted to hurry and get away. He wanted to hurry and find a way to get to his team. He hastily looked around, but his eyes were already facing the sky. Lord Grimm quickly followed with another attack. After underground tunneling technique was a knock-up skill, launching Laughing Song into the air. This didn't mean that Fang Minghua had to give up on his original plans. He could still observe the surroundings and make decisions while in the air. Fang Minghua hastily adjusted his view, but as soon as he turned, the ground was now rapidly retreating away along with the sword pressed against Laughing Song's stomach. Colliding stab. Before Laughing Song was fully airborne, Lord Grimm attacked. By doing this, with Laughing Song's feet off the ground, the knockback from colliding stab would be at its fastest and its farthest. Where is he taking me? Fang Minghua quickly thought. The damage from colliding stab wasn't significant. It was also rarely used as part of a combo. It had 2 main uses. Its first use was as a movement skill. The second use was to displace the opponent. In a team competition, its second usage was more commonly seen. When focusing on a certain target, you always wanted to bring the target to an appropriate location. Including the underground tunneling technique, Lord Grimm had only used a total of 2 skills before coming out with colliding stab. Along with the fact that was still in the air, it definitely seemed like Ye Xiu was taking him somewhere. Is Happy planning on focusing me? Fang Minghua felt that it seemed unlikely. From what he remembered, Happy didn't have anyone nearby who could get to him, unless they planned on forcing their way over. So that's their plan. Fang Minghua couldn't help but look around again. He quickly noticed another figure coming into view. From afar, dancing rain had thrown a burning beacon onto him. The mushroom cloud from the heat-seeking missile instantly engulfed him, but during this process, Lord Grimm took care of him very dearly. He didn't let Laughing Song get sent flying away from the shockwave. But honestly, Fang Minghua didn't want Ye Xiu's concern for him. He could understand Su Ma-cheng providing support with an attack over here, but soon after the dense smoke dispersed, a red shadow flickered in front of him. Soft mist. With help from Su Ma-cheng, Tang Ru had been fighting against Jiang Batao and Wu Qi, yet in the blink of an eye she had reached Laughing Song. This was an aggression without regard for anything else. But because of this, Fang Minghua wasn't as flustered as before. Happy's sudden shift in targets was rather crude. Happy had directly left Jiang Batao and Wu Qi open. The two of them weren't outside bystanders. They would quickly be in pursuit. The balance wasn't so easily grasped. Just when he was thinking this, he saw Jiang Batao's empty waves and Wu Qi's cruel silence close behind soft mist, not giving an inch to her. But soon afterwards, the distance between them suddenly widened. Dragon breaks the ranks. Soft mist suddenly used this high-level skill. Laughing Song was still airborne, and Ye Xiu's Lord Grimm was still taking care of him. There was no way he could dodge this attack. Suddenly, he was sent flying into the air again. Soft mist instantly closed in onto Laughing Song. Ye Xiu's Lord Grimm followed close behind with a shining cut. They wanted to avoid Samsara's rescue team. Fang Minghua saw through it, but wasn't that being too naive? Jiang Batao's empty waves had fewer movement options, so the distance between them widened by quite a bit. But Wu Qi's cruel silence was an assassin, the best out of all 24 classes in terms of mobility. He immediately went in pursuit with a shining cut. Then he activated swift movements and sprinted. It wouldn't take long for him to catch up. Laughing Song could completely survive until then. After all, Happy was mainly trying to move him away. Their DPS wasn't nearly as high as it could be. Right when Soft Mist's dragon breaks the ranks ended, Laughing Song was picked up by Lord Grimm. Fling! Laughing Song was thrown out. What Fang Minghua was puzzled. Then he saw magic ripple outwards from Soft Mist. Then she blinked away. Teleport. Soft Mist teleported to where Laughing Song would fall and then followed with an attack. Cruel Silence, who was just about to catch up, was suddenly thrown behind, let alone Jiang Batao, who was even farther away. He was even farther away than Sun Xiang's one autumn leaf. This isn't good. Fang Minghua was startled by Ye Xiu's and Tang Ru's practiced coordination. This meant that the two weren't doing this on the spur of the moment. Happy had practiced this tactic before. This was a setup. Anyone with a bit of experience would understand. Oftentimes, pre-planned setups couldn't keep up with the constant changes of a match, but if this sort of setup was able to be implemented smoothly, the other side would always have the upper hand. From the coordination between Ye Xiu and Tang Ru and the interference towards the pursuers from Su Ma-cheng, he could see hints of it. Happy wasn't recklessly charging at him. They were planning on moving him around until he died. As soon as he thought of this, he looked at the two characters carrying out this task. Lord Grimm didn't need to be mentioned. With so many movement skills at his disposal, his unspecialized sat comfortably as king in terms of mobility. As for Soft Mist, he could see the buff from the neutral chasers around her legs, drastically increasing her movement speed. Sun Xiang's one autumn leaf had been left in the dust because he didn't have the buff from neutral chasers. Bad. Happy's tactic was bad news for them. Chapter 1692. A gun can miss. Chapter 1692. A gun can miss. Translator. Namyami Editor. Namyami. Fang Minghua sensed Happy's intentions, and he knew that the situation was not looking good. He was very clear about the mobility of Samsara's characters. Normally speaking, assassins, battle mages, and sharpshooters were relatively mobile. His laughing song and Jiang Batao's empty waves were only slightly worse. However, right now, Laughing Song didn't need to move on his own. Ye Xiu's Lord Grim and Tang Ru's Soft Mist were helping him move using blow-away and knockback skills. Laughing Song's current movement speed was even faster than his sprinting. Sima Cheng helped block the pursuers and would even coordinate with Ye Xiu and Tang Ru from time to time. Together, the three of them formed a beautiful combo. Battle Mage and Launcher. Ye Xiu and Sima Cheng, best partners. All of these were a part of this well-coordinated play. On Samsara's side, even with swift movements activated, Wu Qi's cruel silence could only keep up with them. Sun Xiang's one autumn leaf had no neutral chasers to buff him and clearly lagged behind. Jiang Batao's empty waves didn't even need to be said. He had been left in the dust. His situation looked rather embarrassing. How bold, the pro players discussed spiritedly. Happy was clearly doing something beyond their expectations. In the finals, especially the deciding match, everyone would always be particularly careful. That was where the saying, anticipated match, boring game came from. But the play that Happy was making, this was an extremely risky play. While attacking Laughing Song, they had to carry him along faster than Samsara could, and Samsara wasn't slow at all. The coordination needed was extraordinarily difficult. There were too many factors needed to be taken into consideration. Even the slightest slip-up would end in failure. Happy's healer, Little Cold Hands, was being blown up by Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer, and Happy wasn't giving their healer even the slightest bit of help. If they made a mistake and Samsara caught up, it would be impossible for them to save Little Cold Hands. Little Cold Hands had lost half his health already. If Samsara was willing to focus him without regard for anything else, they could finish off Little Cold Hands in the blink of an eye. Failure meant death. Happy was determined to carry out this healer trade. They were walking on a tightrope, not leaving themselves any path of retreat. A single misstep and they would fall into a bottomless abyss. Compared to their brilliant teamwork, the pro players admired Happy's bravery more. The other problem was that a majority of their efforts needed to be put into moving Laughing Song, so even though Ye Xiu and Tang Ru were both dealing damage, their DPS was mediocre. They couldn't compare to Zhou Zekai's explosive DPS towards Little Cold Hands. Zhou Zekai felt a bit more at ease because of this, but he didn't stop paying attention to that side. Seeing that the other three on Samsara weren't able to catch up to Happy's side, Zhou Zekai had decided to give them a helping hand. He could see how difficult it was for Happy to execute this play. The slightest interference might be able to break it apart. His Cloud Piercer wasn't faster than Cruel Silence or One Autumn Leaf, but he was a long-ranged attacker. He could attack Ye Xiu and Tang Ru from his current position. He made his decision. Cloud Piercer suddenly stepped back and moved to the side. Then he lifted his guns. Bang! Gunshot, a figure, blood. Little Cold Hands suddenly moved to the side too, positioning himself in front of the guns. Knee strike. Cloud Piercer lifted his knee. He wasn't in a hurry to keep Little Cold Hands under control. Even a single bullet might be enough to break open the situation on that side. He only needed a tiny opening, and during this tiny opening, what could a cleric do to him? And Wenyi obviously couldn't do anything to him. He only had one thought on his mind. I have to stop Zhou Zekai from providing support no matter what. His Little Cold Hands had no combat ability. His little tricks might work against Samsara's healer, but it was nothing in front of Zhou Zekai. The only thing he could use was Little Cold Hands' body. He could use his life to block Cloud Piercer's bullets. And Wenyi was certain that he had never been this focused in his entire life. His Little Cold Hands had been taking a beating the entire time, but as soon as Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer moved aside to shoot towards that side, he immediately did all he could to stop him. Sometimes he could do it. Sometimes he couldn't, but he knew how crucial this moment was. He couldn't fail this time. Little Cold Hands threw himself towards Cloudpiercer's guns, but what followed soon after was a knee strike, and when he saw it very clearly, Little Cold Hands jumped back. The knee strike missed, but with this dodge, a small opening was left behind. Cloudpiercer raised his guns and fired twice. Little Cold Hands jumped up, and when he had Little Cold Hands jump towards Cloudpiercer's head to block his vision. The only thing that Joe Zekai could see was a blood-soaked cleric's robe. Blind firing. Joe Zekai had the ability to do so, but the problem was that he needed to aim at a very fast-moving target. Even if he had a clear view of his target, he would need to predict where the target would move ahead of time. It wouldn't have been easy. But now that he was blinded, it was too difficult even for Joe Zekai. Even so, he still fired his guns. The bullets loaded and fired. He had to at least try. The gunshot startled Nweni, but he didn't dare look back. What if it missed? He had to keep going. But at this moment, Cloudpiercer jumped up and his Little Cold Hands was currently falling. There was a difference in timing, and this time, let alone Joe Zekai's line of sight, even Cloudpiercer's 2 guns were above him. There's nothing I can do, and Nweni could only watch. He had no way to stop Cloudpiercer from attacking. Damn it, and Nweni hated himself for being so useless. Gunshot. The airborne Cloudpiercer fired 2 shots in quick succession. But then Nweni saw Ye Xiu type in chat, "Keep it up." This time Nweni couldn't help but look back. Ye Xiu's Lord Grim was using charge to move ahead. His umbrella was in its shield form, a priest weapon, so it didn't affect his usage of charge. As a result, he saw Lord Grim's umbrella facing the side, blocking Cloudpiercer's shots. Don't get careless. Just because he's fired his gun doesn't mean that we'll definitely be hit, Ye Xiu continued. Also, Little Joe, wasn't your attack a bit too careless? As he said this, the canopy of the myriad manifestations umbrella folded. The umbrella ribs retracted, exposing the muzzle of a gun. Gunshot. Ye Xiu had fired back at Joe Zekai's Cloudpiercer. Chapter 1693, Dual Guns Erupt. Chapter 1693. Dual Guns Erupt. Translator. Namiyami Editor. Namiyami block, counterattack, and taunt in the chat. Ye Xiu's response seemed so casual, and when he was so moved he almost cried. This was his teammate, a teammate that couldn't be more reliable. He might not have been able to stop Joe Zekai from attacking, but his teammates weren't going to be done in so easily. His teammates were all far stronger than him. It was precisely because he had such amazing teammates that his reckless interference was especially meaningful. I have to keep going, and Nweni grit his teeth. But at this moment, a bullet flew over. Finally, it wasn't Joe Zekai's Cloudpiercer harassing others, but someone harassing him. The speed of the bullet wasn't fast, which let Joe Zekai know that this was a stun bullet. It moved slowly and had low damage, but its secondary effect was frightening. The attack had to be avoided. However, Cloudpiercer was currently airborne, making it much more difficult for him to dodge. Joe Zekai looked at the direction of the bullet. Then Cloudpiercer fired rapidly towards the ground, using aerial gun to force Cloudpiercer to the side. The stun bullet brushed past him just like that. But pooh! The sound of a bullet hitting flesh could be heard clearly. How? Joe Zekai was startled. He saw it clearly. Cloudpiercer should have been outside of the bullet's trajectory. But what hit Cloudpiercer was unmistakably a stun bullet. Behind, Joe Zekai realized what had happened, but Cloudpiercer was stunned now. There was nothing he could do as he fell from the skies. Dancing rain. Countless people only realized it after the replay. When Ye Xiu counterattacked, Sima Cheng coordinated with him and fired a stun bullet from behind Cloudpiercer. The two of them timed it perfectly. The stun bullets were fired at the exact same time. Even a godly sharpshooter like Joe Zekai hadn't noticed that 2 bullets had been fired at that moment. As for the others on Samsara, they had been waiting for Joe Zekai to create an opportunity for them to rescue Laughing Song. How could they have known Ye Xiu and Sima Cheng would work together to attack Zhou Zekai? Even now, they were still lamenting that the attempt to block Ye Xiu had failed. They were still hoping for Zhou Zekai to try again, and hadn't noticed that a stun bullet had hit Cloud Piercer. And Wenyi didn't know either. All he saw was Cloud Piercer dodging Lord Grimm's stun bullet. I can't only rely on my teammates, I have to work even harder. And Wenyi strengthened his resolve, but immediately afterwards he noticed that Cloud Piercer was stunned, and Wenyi's mind worked quickly. He didn't understand how, but Cloud Piercer was stunned. The stun bullet hit, and Wenyi was puzzled. He had clearly seen the bullet miss. How did he get hit? Ye Xiu, how did he pull that off? And Wenyi was thinking too much, but he knew that he had to seize this opening. He had been working as a meat shield the entire time, but now there was an opportunity for him to attack back. Little Cold Hands was covered in blood, yet the light of her holy cross shone as pure and bright as ever. Hypnosis. And Wenyi wanted to use this skill the most. However, although hypnosis had a powerful CC effect, it had a long cast time. The stun duration wasn't enough for Little Cold Hands to complete hypnosis. The next best thing was Sacred Fire. 5 seconds of reduced damage and 3 seconds of silence. Sharpshooters utilized their normal attacks far more than other classes, so being silenced wasn't as terrifying for them. However, it would still greatly reduce his combat strength. More importantly, clerics didn't have any better CC skills available. No matter how great Zhou Zekai was, he couldn't cleanse the stun. He could only watch as Little Cold Hands summoned a Sacred Fire. The spell was cast, and holy fire engulfed Cloud Piercer. It wasn't until these flames blazed that the others on Samsara realized that something had happened to Zhou Zekai. Everyone turned to look and saw Little Cold Hands lighting Cloud Piercer on fire at that distance. A cleric without any protection was actually able to land Sacred Fire on Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer. Stunned, frozen, hypnotized, dizzy. In any case, the others on Samsara could ascertain that Cloud Piercer had definitely suffered some immobilizing effect. Help him. The thought popped into everyone's minds, but it was quickly thrown aside. No matter what status he was affected by, it wouldn't last long. Zhou Zekai was only facing a cleric, who posed no threat to him. Cloud Piercer was also a long-ranged attacker. Even if Wenyi's Little Cold Hands ran away during this time, he wouldn't be able to escape from Cloud Piercer's attack range. There's no need to help him. Everyone came to the same conclusion. However, they had to face the effects of Zhou Zekai temporarily gone. And Wenyi's Little Cold Hands didn't run away because he knew that he couldn't. The key was Caio Yifen's 1-inch ash. He had been pinned down by Zhou Zekai the entire time. The heroic leap from Wenyi's Little Cold Hands had helped him win a small opening, but that had only happened once. Afterwards, as Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer attacked Little Cold Hands, he also took care of Caio Yifen's 1-inch ash, preventing him from setting up any ghost boundaries. And Wenyi obviously wanted to protect him, but close combat was never a cleric's specialty in the first place. When Zhou Zekai truly focused on him, there was only so much he could do. When he blocked the bullet for Ye Xiu and Tang Ru, he had gotten lucky. 1-inch ash. Samsara's players shifted their attention to 1-inch ash. But soon afterwards, they discovered that 1-inch ash had disappeared. To the side of the lofty pyramid were the remains of an ancient city. Destroyed walls and pillars were scattered throughout the ruins. When Cloud Piercer had been hit by the stun bullet, Caio Yifen's 1-inch ash had taken the opportunity to hide who knew where. Zhou Zekai hadn't noticed. No one on Samsara had noticed. Even Wenyi hadn't noticed. Many of the spectators hadn't noticed Sima Cheng's stun bullet until the replay, but Caio Yifen had noticed it, because he was always paying attention to the entire battlefield. He was always observing each and every teammate and opponent. The simultaneous stun bullets from Lord Grimm and Dancing Rain. Apart from Ye Xiu and Sima Cheng themselves, He was the only player on the battlefield to have noticed their teamwork. It'll hit, Xiu Yifen determined at that moment. Should he place down a ghost boundary to further suppress Cloud Piercer? He quickly dispelled the thought, because Xiu Yifen didn't have any ghost boundaries available that would suppress Cloud Piercer effectively. Darkness boundary and ice boundary were on cooldown. Ash boundary, silence boundary wouldn't be effective on Cloud Piercer. It would be somewhat of a waste of an opportunity. As for flame boundary, which dealt damage, and plague boundary, which changed the opponent's stats, those were even more meaningless. In the end, Xiu Yifen chose to move away. Using this opportunity, 1-inch Ash escaped from Cloud Piercer's firing range. Little Cold Hands and Cloud Piercer were too close, so the stun duration wasn't long enough for Little Cold Hands to run away. However, Xiu Yifen had been trying to run away from Zhou Zekai for a long time and was farther away from him. Now that such a huge opening had appeared, escaping would be easy. Cloud Piercer's bullet didn't chase after him. In fact, none of the other Samsara players had looked towards 1-inch Ash. Xiu Yifen's heart was beating like crazy. He knew that he had to take advantage of this opportunity no matter what. He contacted Ye Xiu in the chat, and the two had a brief conversation. 1-inch Ash carefully hid himself behind a crumbling wall. His silver weapon, Snow Stripe, started to glow. Chapter 1694, Phantom Demons Obstruction. Chapter 1694, Phantom Demons Obstruction. Translator, Namyami Editor, Namyami Boom Boom Boom. Lord Grim and Soft Mist sent Laughing Song hurtling away. As they pushed him along, they attacked Laughing Song whenever they could. The skillful coordination between the two of them made even their teammate, Xiu Yifen, sigh in admiration. At the same time, he also noticed that Lord Grim had set it up so that Laughing Song wouldn't be able to see 1-inch Ash. Is that also considered vanishing step? Xiu Yifen thought to himself. He didn't forget to be diligent with his observations. Whether it was an ally or an enemy, he would do his best to find things that he could improve upon from them. From Lord Grim's attacks towards Laughing Song, Xiu Yifen could see hints of vanishing step. Usually, vanishing step was performed by moving into their dead angles. In this case, Ye Xiu was using Lord Grim's attacks to adjust Laughing Song's positioning, placing 1-inch Ash inside Laughing Song's dead angles. The principle's the same, but it looks even harder than vanishing step, Xiu Yifen believed. Using attacks to control someone else's character was definitely much more difficult than controlling your own character. Now, it's my turn. Xiu Yifen wouldn't forget to keep learning even inside a match, but he wouldn't forget about his mission either. Seeing Lord Grim and Soft Mist moving Laughing Song along, his 1-inch Ash immediately began casting as if he had received an order. The ghostly power flowed along his blade like water. Suddenly, it dripped down and sunk into the ground, spreading outwards. Outside of the ruins, Wu Qi's cruel silence was still the fastest among Samsara. Even though Samsara had noticed that Xiu Yifen's 1-inch Ash had suddenly vanished, rescuing Laughing Song was necessary. For now, they could only stay in pursuit while being wary of their surroundings. 19 steps away, Wu Qi was keeping track of the distance. The distance between Cruel Silence and Laughing Song wasn't steady. Sometimes the distance would widen. Sometimes the distance would shrink. After all, the two sides weren't simply running. Ye Xiu and Tang Ru had to coordinate together, and Wu Qi needed to avoid Su Macheng's interference. Sure enough, not marking Su Macheng had a huge impact. Samsara could feel it deeply. If not for Dancing Rain's interference, they might have been able to catch up to Lord Grim and Soft Mist by now. However, the situation couldn't be considered too terrible. Wu Qi was confident. With him in close pursuit, Lord Grim and Soft Mist could only attack on occasion. Laughing Song would still be able to survive for a long time. During this time, would the two unhappy be able to keep this up without making a single mistake? Zhou Zekai's previous long-ranged assistance had failed, but that didn't mean it would stop there. Suppose the worst case, and Wenyi's little cold hands was able to prevent him from providing support every single time. In that case, Zhou Zekai could simply focus on killing little cold hands and then help them. There was more than enough time. There was also Sima Cheng's interference. Samsara was preparing to restrict her. Jiang Batao's empty waves was slower than the others. He was being left farther and farther behind, so it was pointless for him to continue chasing. He might as well turn around and go for Sima Cheng's dancing rain. The others hadn't noticed the stun bullet from Sima Cheng onto Cloud Piercer, but Zhou Zekai had. He told his team, and the team felt like a box one on Sima Cheng was necessary. They shouldn't be giving her free rein. However, Samsara hadn't expected Happy to make such a bold play. Moreover, Ye Xiu's methods were rather risky, which was why they all charged over there. If they had known this would end up being a competition in speed and that Happy had specifically practiced for this, they would have split up the work long ago. For example, Jiang Batao's empty waves was a spellblade who wasn't suited for a race. They had promptly made the necessary adjustments. It couldn't be said that their reaction was slow, so they weren't feeling too frantic at the moment. The only problem was Kaio Yifen's 1-inch ash. That guy had suddenly disappeared. For Samsara, he was a huge worry. Phantom demons had immense crowd control. If they were suddenly caught in one of his ghost boundaries, it would be devastating. Even though they were worried, Samsara didn't slow down. The only thing that they could do was give chase. Since they weren't clear about 1-inch Ash's situation, worrying about him too much would only distract them. Samsara was quite resolved about this point. Wu Qi's cruel silence carried on the glorious speed of an assassin, moving swiftly like an arrow. With a flicker, he appeared into Kaio Yifen's line of sight. Suddenly, he slowed down. What's going on? Wu Qi was startled for a moment, but he quickly realized what had happened. The earth beneath Cruel Silence's feet looked as if it had been dyed with black ink. His every moment suddenly seemed heavy. Ash Boundary increased the weight of the affected characters, reducing their movement speed. The effects had spread onto Cruel Silence. The distance between Cruel Silence and Laughing Song suddenly widened. Cruel Silence could only trudge his way through slowly. He turned his head and saw 1-inch Ash hiding behind the wall. Wu Qi sent a message, telling his team of 1-inch Ash's position. However, it would take him some time before he walked out of the Ash Boundary. Jiang Batao's empty waves was charging towards Dancing Rain. Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer was no longer stunned, but he couldn't see 1-inch Ash from his position. It would be hard for him to cover him. There was only Sun Xiang's 1 autumn leaf left. 1 autumn leaf had also been caught by the Ash Boundary. However, he had been slightly behind Cruel Silence, who was at the very center of it. That meant that he would be able to exit the Ash Boundary much sooner. Right now, they needed to keep close to Lord Grim and Soft Mist, which meant that they had to keep pushing forward. However, if he wanted to leave this Ash Boundary, he would need to fall back. 1 autumn leaf moved back. He had no other choice. Cruel Silence slowly moved forward as he waited for a skill to come off cooldown. Shining Cut. With this movement skill, Cruel Silence would be able to quickly get out of the Ash Boundary. But then he saw the Ghost God's power gathering around 1-inch Ash's Takai, Snow Stripe. A deathly silence descended. The Shining Cut that had just gone off cooldown was suddenly sealed. Silence Boundary. All skills were silenced while inside of it. Weighed down by Ash Boundary and silenced by Silence Boundary, Cruel Silence could only slowly walk forward. Even though 1 autumn leaf had escaped, if he wanted to push forward, he would need to go around the Ghost Boundary. Lord Grim and Soft Mist were getting farther and farther away, but he would need to go around the Ghost Boundary while also being careful of 1-inch Ash. Sun Xiang was feeling particularly annoyed. But right now, he was facing an even more difficult choice. Should he continue chasing after Lord Grim and Soft Mist, or should he go after 1-inch Ash? He wasn't the only one thinking this question. Outside of the match, the pro players were also in a fervent discussion. One Autumn Leaf was very far from Lord Grim and Soft Mist. If he continued to give chase, would he be able to catch up? Lord Grim and Soft Mist had no way escaped outside of Cloud Piercer's attack range. If Joe Zekai wanted to provide support to his side, he would need to give up on Little Cold Hands. However, giving up on Little Cold Hands was risky. Little Cold Hands didn't have much health left. If he gave up on him and Laughing Song wasn't rescued in the end, it would be like losing an army after having given away the bride. It looked like Joe Zekai was clearly prioritizing killing Little Cold Hands. Without his support and at this distance, would giving chase do anything? But if he didn't give chase, the other side would be completely free. They could stop and focus on attacking. It would be a 2v1, and it wouldn't be long before Laughing Song was killed. A healer-for-healer trade would be Samsara's loss. That was certain. Both options were unfavorable for Samsara, but what if he could kill 1-inch Ash here? Someone suddenly said. Both sides would kill the other side's healer, but Samsara would also take down 1-inch Ash. That would be a 1v2 trade, and that was undoubtedly a trade that Samsara would take. But that would be quite difficult, no, Ye Xiu said. He had the right of speech on anything related to Kaio Yifen's 1-inch Ash. As the number 1 phantom demon, he knew what Kaio Yifen should do next. I know it. Seeing Kaio Yifen's response, Ye Xiu nodded his head. 1-inch Ash walked out. His position was already exposed. There was no point in hiding behind the wall anymore, so he walked out from behind the wall. Not just Wu Qi, but Sun Xiang also knew exactly where he was. However, 1-inch Ash was standing inside his ghost boundary. Ghost boundaries weren't just to control and restrict the enemy. Ghost boundaries such as sword boundary could also buff the strength and intelligence of allies. At the same time, the ghost boundaries that debuff the enemy could also be considered a form of protection for allies as well. No. Countless players, especially the close-ranged ones, loathed ghost boundaries. The more extreme ones even considered ghost boundaries as a bug. Because if the Ghost Blade stepped into his own ghost boundary, how were the close-ranged classes supposed to fight him? How? Fight the Ghost Blade while being unable to see inside a darkness boundary, or while slowed in an ash boundary, or while unable to use skills in a silence boundary. It was impossible. That was why Sun Xiang could only look at him hatefully. It wasn't that close-ranged classes had no methods to deal with ghost boundary. However, these methods were slow and required time. But what Samsara lacked the most was time. While he slowly contended with Kaio Yifen, Ye Xiu and Tang Ru would kill off Laughing Song in the blink of an eye and then come back to help Kaio Yifen. If Jiang Batao were still there, Wang Jixi said. Jiang Batao's empty waves was a spellblade. Spellblade attacks weren't long-ranged, but mid-ranged. But since he didn't need to get close, he didn't need to slowly contend with a ghost blade. Moreover, with another player's fighting strength, Samsara would be able to kill 1-inch Ash much faster if they focused him. They could decisively give up on Laughing Song and go for a 2-for-1 trade. But unfortunately, Jiang Batao wasn't there. Chapter 1695, A Glimmering Technique. Chapter 1695, A Glimmering Technique. Translator, Namiyami. Editor, Namiyami. Was it a problem with Samsara's arrangements? After Pan Lin and Li Yibo analyzed the present situation, most of the viewers thought so. If Jiang Batao were there, the situation would be much better. However, Jiang Batao wasn't there. If that wasn't a problem with their arrangements, then what was it? But the pro players disagreed. Saying that it was an issue with Samsara's arrangements was like giving advice in hindsight. At that time, Samsara's decision to send away Jiang Batao had been correct. On the other hand, their decision to ignore Su Cheng's dancing rein at the start and have everyone go rescue Fang Minghua was questionable. At this moment, because of Jiang Badao's absence, Kaio Yifan posed an enormous problem for Samsara. Then again, if Jiang Badao's empty waves had been there, Kaio Yifan probably wouldn't have made the same play. Instead of saying that it was a problem with Samsara's arrangements, it would be better to say it was a timely decision from Kaio Yifan. Through his astute observations of the overall battle, he was able to create a new situation that looked as if it stemmed from an error on Samsara's part. An outstanding team player, the pro players praised. Every single time this happened, it was a form of torture to Tiny Herb. The profound stares from everyone said everything. No matter how calm they may be, they couldn't help but feel a bit uncomfortable. Samsara had no time to admire Kaio Yifan's incredible play. For them, this incredible play meant huge trouble for them. Lord Grim and Soft Mist, should they chase them or not? It was a difficult decision. Sun Xiang's one autumn leaf circled around the ghost boundary. Chase. Sun Xiang saw it. After he and Wu Qi were blocked by Kaio Yifan, he saw Ye Xiu and Tang Ru slow down, waiting to see what he and Wu Qi did before taking the next step. If Samsara turned on 1-inch Ash, those two would probably stop completely and focus on killing Laughing Song as fast as possible. Samsara didn't wish to see this happen. Whether or not they could catch up wasn't important, they would at least be putting pressure on them. That way, Happy had to keep moving Laughing Song along, and perhaps those two might make a mistake. Chase, he had to give chase. If the two of them couldn't, then at least one of them should. Sun Xiang understood this point and immediately sent a message to Wu Qi through the team chat. The two split up. Kaio Yifan was left to Wu Qi, while Sun Xiang had one autumn leaf circle around to continue giving chase. Suddenly, sword light flashed. Moonlight slash into full moonlight slash. The classic ghost blade combo appeared in front of one autumn leaf. Sun Xiang wasn't looking for trouble, but Kaio Yifan was. Postured like a sword demon, a phantom demon attacked. How could Kaio Yifan, who excelled at reading the big picture, not recognize the severity of the situation? Little cold hands, death was certain. Whether Ye Xiu and Tang Ru could finish off Fang Minghua's Laughing Song was crucial. For this to happen, blocking Sun Xiang and Wu Qi from getting to them was essential. Kaio Yifan couldn't let them through no matter what. Unfortunately, 1-inch Ash's CC skills were on cooldown. No matter how much damage Flame Boundary dealt, or how much defense Plague Boundary lowered, it wouldn't stop the other side from getting through. Out of choices, Kaio Yifan could only have 1-inch Ash take the fight to one autumn leaf. Sun Xiang's reaction was quick. One autumn leaf sidestepped twice, evading 1-inch Ash's attacks. 1-inch Ash was extremely close to him. Sun Xiang really wanted to beat him up with his evil annihilation. He suddenly had an idea and quickly typed in the chat, "Switch." Having Wu Qi, who was trapped in a ghost boundary, deal with Kaio Yifan wasn't as easy as it sounded. Affected by both Ash Boundary and Silence Boundary, Cruel Silence's combat prowess was extremely weak. In an actual 1v1 against 1-inch Ash, he would certainly be on the losing side. He might even be completely dominated. Close-ranged classes claiming ghost boundaries as bugs wasn't without its reasoning. But right now, Kaio Yifan was ignoring Wu Qi, instead going for Sun Xiang. If 1-inch Ash were pinned down by one autumn leaf, then when Cruel Silence left the two ghost boundaries, it wouldn't be too big of a delay considering an assassin's speed. So, switch. Sun Xiang was ecstatic seeing this opportunity appear. It seemed like the attentive Kaio Yifan had made a mistake because of his heavy responsibilities. Tyrant's destruction. The moment he typed out switch, one autumn leaf unleashed a tyrant's destruction to push 1-inch Ash farther away from his ghost boundaries. Without ghost boundaries, a phantom demon would be at a huge disadvantage in close combat. A phantom demon's essential tools, ghost boundaries, required cast times, but how could there be any time for them to cast anything in close combat? As for their remaining attacks, those with low-level elementalist and battle mage skills. However, these skills were mainly reserved for survival, not actual combat. But Xiu Yifan's reaction was unexpectedly fast as well. When the tyrant's destruction swung his way, 1-inch Ash leapt backwards and then moved to the side. His rhythm was light and brisk. His movement gave people a sense of familiarity, but it seemed rather strange on 1-inch Ash. "What's this?" The number 1 phantom demon, Ye Xiu, blurted out. He was incomparably familiar with phantom demons, but his first thought was that his movement seemed strange. The experienced pro players had the same feeling, but for a moment they couldn't quite pinpoint why. After this next step, 1-inch Ash stepped to the side again. "Overlapping sidesteps," someone shouted. When this name was said, everyone immediately understood where this sense of déjà vu came from. Overlapping sidesteps wasn't a rarely seen technique. In fact, it was a very common one. However, because many classes had their own unique playstyles, many classes had their own unique techniques. Overlapping sidesteps was one such technique. It was a very basic movement technique. It was done by using small steps at a fast pace to circle around the opponent's side or back to complete a back attack. Back attacks dealt extra damage, which was a mechanic common to all classes. However, there was one particular class which had additional bonuses for back attacks. Assassins. The Assassin class advancement skill, Assassination Arts, buffed the damage from back attacks even further. Assassins were inherently fast and nimble, so players tried to go for back attacks whenever possible. Any class could perform overlapping sidesteps. It was just that assassins made the best use of the technique. As a result, assassins were usually the best at this movement technique. 1-inch Ash obviously wasn't an assassin. A few close-ranged classes would sometimes use it, but ghost blades, particularly phantom demons, seemed to have no relation with this technique. But at this moment, 1-inch Ash was using it, making the people watching feel like it was an unfamiliar sight. However, the distinct characteristics of the technique could clearly be seen. It didn't look like he was doing it on a whim. Only a practiced and skilled assassin had this level of mastery. Why would a ghost blade, a phantom demon, have practiced an assassin's technique to this extent? To the point that he could even execute it so smoothly at such a critical moment. Many people felt puzzled, but those with an understanding of Xiu Yifan's background, especially the tiny herb players, didn't find it particularly strange. When Xiu Yifan had been a part of Tiny Herb, the team had him play an assassin. It was a class that he had bitterly practiced with in the pro scene for half a year. He had switched classes to a phantom demon, but he hadn't abandoned the techniques that he had practiced as an assassin. He had worked hard to learn those assassin techniques. Even though his new class wasn't suited for them, he felt like keeping them under his belt could never be a bad thing. After all, he had a teammate who was proficient with all classes, and Xiu Yifan had seen him use techniques from numerous classes, transforming the rotten into the miraculous. He didn't have the talent to be proficient in all classes, but everything he had already practiced was a weapon. There would be a day, a moment, where it would be useful. Even a single time would be enough for it all to be worth it. And this moment had come. Overlapping sidesteps, a very ordinary technique that many assassins were extremely familiar with. This technique was used to get to the side or behind an opponent as fast as possible, but this didn't mean that the opponent would be unable to move. Against an opponent of Sun Xiang's caliber, a two-step overlapping sidesteps was something that he could keep up with. What's more, these overlapping sidesteps were being done by a phantom demon, not an assassin. No one could have expected a phantom demon to use overlapping sidesteps, let alone have such mastery over it. It was as if he were an actual assassin. When Sung Xian realized this and reacted, 1-inch Ash completed his third step. 3 steps, 3 small steps, and 1-inch Ash circled around from one autumn leaf's front to his side. Only then did Sun Xiang react. Only then did one autumn leaf move. But 1-inch Ash had already made his move. Lunge. A low-level blade master skill, an extremely fast stab. It was too fast. It was impossible to dodge. One autumn leaf was hit. The damage from the skill wasn't high, but the skill had a knockback effect. Sun Xiang's expression changed. He realized what this knockback meant. To one autumn leaf's side was the ash and silence boundary. Chapter 1696, First Death. Chapter 1696, First Death. Translator. Namyami Editor. Namyami. Weight increased, skills sealed. Chase after Lord Grim and Soft missed under the effects of both Ash Boundary and Silence Boundary. Kill Kaio Yifen's 1-inch Ash. Don't even bother thinking about these possibilities. Sun Xiang's one autumn leaf had been pushed into the overlapping ghost boundaries. Ghost boundary effects usually only lasted a few seconds, but on the pro stage, a few seconds was more than enough to alter the course of the match. Lord Grim and Soft Mist immediately stopped their high-speed movement, instead switching into kill mode. The two characters poured out their attacks and skills. Laughing Song's health plummeted as if someone had turned on the tap. Sun Xiang and Wu Qi could only watch quietly. They were the closest to Laughing Song, but these ghost boundaries made them feel as if they were the farthest away. Jiang Batao's empty waves had already started suppressing Dancing Rain. It wasn't possible for him to switch targets and worry about others. No matter the development, suppressing Su Ma-cheng would always be an important win condition. Samsara had indeed been too hasty before. Suppressing Su Ma-cheng should have been a task carried out at all times. There was also Zhou Zekai. Whenever the team was in a stalemate, at a disadvantage, or in an uncertain situation, Zhou Zekai would always stand out, using his powerful presence to lead Samsara out, turning the tides and putting them on the road to victory. It was almost to be expected. As a result, countless eyes looked towards Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer. The Samsara fans hoped for another miracle from Zhou Zekai. Happy's players would never relax their guard against this top player. Among them, there was one pair of eyes that was practically glued to Cloud Piercer. His gaze never went anywhere else. And when he didn't know that Kaio Yifen had sealed off Samsara's 2 pursuers with his ghost boundaries. He didn't know that Ye Xiu and Tang Ru had stopped to hurry and kill Laughing Song. He didn't know that Su Ma-cheng was fighting against Jiang Batao, trying to find an opportunity to help her teammates. He didn't even know how much health Little Cold Hands had left, nor did he look at Cloud Piercer's health. The only thing he paid attention to was Cloud Piercer's movements and his 2 guns. Left, right, retreat, jump, and when he stared at the movements of the guns, his Little Cold Hands reacted accordingly. In the pro scene, he was seen as a clear weakness of Happy's, but at this moment he was keeping watch over the best of the best in glory, based on what and when he didn't know. Or perhaps it was just his conviction to stop Zhou Zekai from escaping, his conviction to win, to be the champion, the Glory Alliance's champion. 1 year ago, 2 years ago, and Wenny could only dream of those words. He had just been another player among the hundreds of millions who played Glory. He had been a cleric who admired Glory's #1 player, Tyranny's Zhang Xinji, and supported Tyranny as a result. That was why he had joined Tyranny's in-game guild, becoming one of the regular healers among Tyrannical Ambition's teams. For the vast majority of players, being a regular in a club guild was considered being among the top players in Glory. But in Tyrannical Ambition, he wasn't even good enough to be one of the elites. The guild's elite team would usually be personally led by the guild leader. For him, the elite team had already been unreachable. But in less than 2 years, he stood on the pro stage, fighting against players who had formerly been on a different plane of existence. He shook hands and greeted his idol, Zhang Xinji, and now he was in the finals fighting for the championship title. So what if he was happy? Weak point. If he could win the championship, nothing else mattered. Fight and hold him down. And Wenyi's little cold hands was like a piece of sesame soft candy. He was tangled around Cloudpiercer, blocking off his guns and his vision. Keep going, he had forgotten everything. The only thing remaining in his heart was his conviction. Even when Little Cold Hands was down to his last drop of life, he didn't hesitate. He wasn't looking at anything else. His final struggle was the same as any other moment. Determined and resolute, he had to block Cloudpiercer no matter what. Bang! This was the last gunshot that Wenyi heard. Then the sky and earth went spinning. He saw Cloudpiercer sweep past him in a flash. I can't let him through, and Wenyi thought to himself. He had Little Cold Hands reach out with his hands to grab onto the corner of Cloudpiercer's windbreaker. Got him. When Little Cold Hands' fingers touched Cloudpiercer's windbreaker, and Wenyi's heart burst with joy. Had he successfully stopped Zhou Zekai again? But in the next second the windbreaker vanished from his view. Only his hand was left, still stretched forward. The world turned gray. It's over, Little Cold Hands fell, becoming the first death this match. For Wenyi, the finals was over. His season was over. He no longer had control over the outcome, but everything he had done still remained. However, he still had one lingering regret in his heart. That windbreaker, why wasn't I able to grab onto it? Happy's healer was dead. Usually this news would make the opposing team overjoyed. Even if Happy's healer was Happy's weakness, a healer was a healer, an irreplaceable asset in the team competition. Whoever controlled the enemy healer controlled the match. Then what if you killed the enemy healer? That was practically an early proclamation of victory. However, apart from some sparse applause from Samsara's fans, no one was excited at this scene. No one felt like the world was theirs when Happy's healer died, because everyone knew that just killing Happy's healer didn't count for anything. Whether Samsara could rescue their own healer was the important question. Cloudpiercer rushed over like an arrow. Laughing Song had been brought outside of his attack range by Lord Grim and Soft Mist, because Wenyi's crazed struggle against him had made it so that he was unable to get closer. I wonder if a new method to deal with Zhou Zekai has been found, Li Yibo joked around, but he didn't get any responses from Pan Lin. He was completely absorbed into the match. And Wenyi's stupid yet smart play, the tenacity and spirit that he showed, wasn't something Pan Lin could laugh about. A new method. It was just a joke. Everyone felt that what they had just witnessed was inconceivable, and something inconceivable often couldn't be replicated. Even Wenyi himself wouldn't be able to repeat his performance today. Before today, he had probably never thought that he could do something like this. Even after this match, when he looked back, he himself would find it unbelievable. A new method. Only something with reason and context could be called a method. This sort of unconventional miracle couldn't be considered a method. Now the miracle had faded away. Samsara's Zhou Zekai had finally regained his freedom. This was also someone brought miracles to Samsara again and again. What would he do for Samsara next? 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, Cloudpiercer quickly gave chase. There was no one to stop him. Even though Suma Cheng's dancing rain fired a few artillery shells at him, she wasn't able to sustain it. Zhang Batao marking her was already paying off. She couldn't do as she pleased anymore. She needed to first deal with empty waves attacks before she could do anything. They're in firing range. Lord Grim and Soft Mist were finally in Cloudpiercer's range. During this time, Ye Xiu and Tang Ru hadn't chosen to escape. They had lost control over Zhou Zekai. They could only hurry and try to finish off Laughing Song. Bullets flew out, and in the blink of an eye, a rain of bullets swept towards them. The two continued to attack as they brought Laughing Song over behind a crumbling wall for some cover. But the cover only lasted a short while. The wall was short and small. In just a few steps, Cloud Piercer had vision of them again. One autumn leaf and cruel silence had finally left the ash boundary and silence boundary. Even though Xiu Yifan had enshrouded them with more ghost boundaries, these new ones didn't have powerful CC effects. As a result, the two didn't hesitate to force their way through them. It looks like this is all I can do. Seeing Laughing Song's remaining health, Xiu Yifan triggered his final move. Ghost Feast. The chained ghost boundaries erupted, and because the ghost boundaries weren't completely overlapping, the ghost god's power enveloped an enormous area. At the same time, even though the ghost feast covered a huge area, its damage and effects weren't as high. Sun Xiang and Wu Qi weren't scared by it. The two used skills to overcome the effects of Ghost Feast and rushed out towards Laughing Song. Laughing Song didn't have much health left, but there was still time. Cloud Piercer's long-ranged attacks weren't able to completely interrupt Lord Grimm's and Soft Mist's attacks, but they were able to influence their offense somewhat, lowering their DPS. Happy wouldn't be able to kill Laughing Song before they arrived. It's Samsara's win. As long as Samsara rescued Laughing Song. At this moment, too many people had this thought. Happy's wandering assault had completely suppressed Laughing Song, but the DPS was too low. Even though Josekai was the only one attacking Little Cold Hands without anyone interfering, he could completely focus on offense. Too slow. Happy had run fast, but their damage output was too low. Sigh. Those with hope for Happy had already begun sighing. But just when Cloud Piercer moved into a new angle to attack, Josekai stared blankly. He had realized something. They had overlooked something once again. Happy's healer was the first to die. Thus, Happy's sixth player would be the first to switch in at the support zone below the pyramid. Steamed Bun Invasion. Chapter 1697. Simple Detail. Chapter 1697. Simple Detail Translator. Namiyami Editor. Namiyami, it was a bit too late for Lord Grimm and Soft Mist to kill Laughing Song, but now, with Steamed Bun Invasion. Ordinary viewers might have noticed how severe the problem was, but the pro players already couldn't help but begin to applaud, because they knew that this was definitely within Happy's calculations. They couldn't fault Samsara for overlooking this, because they had only noticed anything when Steamed Bun Invasion had entered from the support zone and joined in on attacking Laughing Song. It was only because they were in the audience and had the omniscient view that they saw Steamed Bun Invasion sooner and recognized the problem faster. And on Samsara's side, even now, Josekai was the only one who had seen Steamed Bun Invasion, and only he had recognized this problem. Sun Xiang and Wu Qi's views were blocked just perfectly, so they hadn't yet seen the sixth player Steamed Bun Invasion, and they hadn't realized that Happy had been running this whole time not just to avoid their pursuers and escape Cloud Piercer's firing range, but also to place the final attack location right next to the support zone. As soon as they began executing this exchange, Happy had realized that Little Cold Hands would definitely die before Laughing Song, so they had made preparations long before. Happy had seen a little further. By the time Samsara realized the problem, it was already too late. Ash. In Samsara's chat, a message from Josekai suddenly appeared. Josekai was extremely decisive. As soon as he realized the problem, he swiftly let go. It was too late to save Laughing Song. This was the conclusion he made, and so Cloud Piercer turned fire, suddenly attacking 1-inch Ash. Sun Xiang and Wu Qi were stunned. The two of them had still been desperately making their way there as fast as they could. Josekai's message, Josekai's intent, they instantly understood, but why? Even now, the two of them still hadn't realized that this was close to the support area. They hadn't realized the problem that because Happy's healer died first, their sixth player would appear and increase their DPS. But right now, There was no time for them to hesitate or ask an extra question. Turn fire. Instantly, these two firmly carried out their captain's directions. On the battlefield, the players were mostly left to rely on their own judgment and initiative, but when there was a clear instruction or intent, cooperation came first. As for whether or not the players could instantly grasp the intent of an instruction, that depended on the tacit understanding between team members. Sun Xiang and Wu Qi hadn't seen steamed bun invasion, so they didn't understand the full situation. But the two cooperated with Zhou Zekai with unquestioning resolve. One autumn leaf, cruel silence, the two characters suddenly spun around, swiftly charging toward 1-inch ash. Kaio Yifan was startled. He had still been calculating which of 1-inch ash's ghost boundaries were off cooldown so he could go sneak attack a few more of Samsara's players, when all of a sudden, 3 of his opponents were suddenly charging toward him without warning. Kaio Yifan's situational awareness was excellent. He was cautious and attentive, but ultimately he still lacked battle experience. Samsara's swift and decisive response caught him off guard. Cloud-Piercer's gunfire came toward 1-inch ash first, and one autumn leaf and cruel silence were converging upon him. Even though these two still didn't understand the reason for turning their fire, their execution was clean and precise. When they switched their target, the first thing they did was cut off the path that 1-inch ash could have used to get support from Lord Grim, Soft Mist, and the others. They wanted to force 1-inch ash into a corner. Kaio Yifan could see this, and he didn't want to tangle with them. 1-inch ash turned tail and ran. With Zhou Zekai's Cloud-Piercer marking him, his 1-inch ash had no chance to cast any ghost boundaries. Moreover, when he'd been slowing down one autumn leaf and cruel silence earlier, 1-inch ash had been setting ghost boundaries one after another without any rhythm. Right now, many of them were still on cooldown. They're on me. While Kaio Yifan had 1-inch ash to flee, he was also swiftly alerting everyone in Happy. Samsara was coming for him, and the escaping Kaio Yifan wasn't simply running away in any random path. There was no way he could race against 3 people. Besides, movement speed wasn't a ghost blade's strength. 1-inch ash leapt forward, tumbling over a fallen stone pillar, and after that he didn't stand up again. Hiding behind it, he frantically crept along. Borrowing this cover, he could avoid at least some of the damage from Cloud-Piercer's fire for now. Kaio Yifan knew that he couldn't escape completely. All he needed to do was stall, to hold on for as long as he could, until his own side could come help him. The cover of the stone pillar also blocked his field of view, so Kaio Yifan couldn't see the situation of his pursuers. However, some distance away, he could see the struggle between Su Macheng and Jiang Batao. If he crept closer, he could achieve a bit of support from Su Macheng's firepower. Kaio Yifan saw very clearly that, right now, Su Macheng might be the only one who could extend a hand of support. But at this moment, Kaio Yifan heard a gunshot. Different types of guns fired shots with different sound effects. Guns of the same type would sound more similar, but the differences between a rifle, a revolver, and a hand cannon were simply too different. The sound of this shot clearly had a lot of strength behind it, and there was no series of rapid sounds after it. This was very clearly characteristic of a rifle shot sound. A rifle right now, the only one on the battlefield with that type of gun was the gun form of Lord Grim's myriad manifestations umbrella. Ye Xiu was currently closing in on Laughing Song. Lord Grim didn't have a reason to use firing attacks. So, was this shot meant to support him? Kaio Yifan was indeed very attentive to detail. After hearing just this one shot, his mind considered many things, and on Su Macheng's end, he noticed that her dancing rain was currently moving toward his own position. But it wasn't clear that it was to support him. It seemed more like she was simply making a strategic supporting movement. Kaio Yifan didn't act rashly. He continued along his chosen path. Only when 1-inch Ash was furiously running did he hurriedly swivel his view to look back. And so he saw Lord Grim. He thought that the others couldn't come support him so quickly, but when he saw Lord Grim's position, he realized that Lord Grim wasn't just firing that one shot when he found the spare time. Lord Grim was actually charging straight out, chasing after the tails of those 3 Samsara players. This is, Xiu Yifan was stunned, but he quickly realized. Stupid. How was he so stupid? The reason why it would have been inconvenient for Ye Xiu and the others to come rescue him was because they had to focus fire to kill Laughing Song as fast as possible before Samsara could save him. But now, Samsara's 3 had clearly changed their target. They were no longer trying to rescue their healer. With that, of course, killing off Laughing Song was no longer a pressing matter. Controlling and killing a cleric, one person was enough for that. So Ye Xiu's Lord Grim quickly broke away to leap at Samsara's tails, without any delay. As expected of a god, even though Xiu Yifan had been playing with Ye Xiu for over 2 years now, his feelings of worship had never faded. Just now, for example, the logic was as simple as adding 1 plus 1, but under the intense conditions of battle, to be able to recognize and react so quickly, that definitely wasn't as simple as 1 plus 1. At least Xiu Yifan hadn't thought of it, and Samsara had overlooked it too, no. In the audience, the pro players were still praising Zhou Zekai's decision to turn fire as unusually decisive. They were just like Xiu Yifan. In that moment, their minds hadn't made the connection. But then, they saw Ye Xiu's Lord Grim rushing forth ferociously. After everyone was stunned for a moment, they too all realized what was going on, and they were filled with mixed emotions. It was such a simple logic, how come they had all overlooked it? The pro players all exchanged glances, and no one spoke. But at that moment, just as it seemed that Cloud Piercer was closing in on 1-inch Ash with single-minded focus, just as it seemed that he was going to seize him in his grasp, Cloud Piercer suddenly made a 180-degree turn. He lifted his dual revolvers and they spat fire. Turned fire. Cloud Piercer actually turned fire once again, moving quickly at the same time. He actually threw 1-inch Ash aside again and charged back toward Laughing Song. This is, the audience was once again dumbfounded. Had Samsara really overlooked such a simple logic? Perhaps some people would, but Zhou Zekai hadn't. He had been using this simple principle to lure Happy into lessening their offense against Laughing Song, and then, using the range advantage of his Cloud Piercer, he turned fire yet again and broke the offense that Happy had mounted against Laughing Song. A small advance and retreat, a link that everyone had overlooked, yet Ye Xiu and Zhou Zekai had set up so many schemes here. Perhaps these two really are on another level, said honored guest Li Yibo in the broadcast. This was an extremely simple detail, but the real story lay within this simple detail. Zhou Zekai controlled Cloud Piercer to charge in that direction. His long-range control was limited, but Fang Minghua wasn't dead. If Zhou Zekai's offense could allow him to seize the slightest opening, he would work as hard as he could to persist. But even so, Zhou Zekai wasn't completely confident. Ideally, Happy would have only left one person to continue attacking Laughing Song. Judging from Happy's bold and wild style today, he felt that that possibility was quite likely. But although Happy was quite unrestrained when they were going wild, when Zhou Zekai hoped for them to go wild, to his surprise, Happy had in fact restrained themselves. Perhaps they had seen through his intention, Zhou Zekai thought. After all, the other side had realized that they could loosen up and send an attacker away. With Ye Xiu's knowledge and shrewdness, it was very likely that they had also prepared to defend against this strategy of baiting the tiger away from the mountain. But if they had recognized this possibility of bait and still sent out an attacker anyway, then it had to be said that Happy really was quite daring. But to go wild like this all the time, there had to be some price to pay, no. Cloud Piercer charged forth, his gunfire quick and biting. Joe Zekai had thought very deeply, but he didn't waver on his decision. He didn't have a good handle on this situation, but he still firmly believed that this was worth an attempt. He believed in himself, and he believed in Fang Minghua. Our healer is still here. Chapter 1698, Steamed Buns Sand Toss. Chapter 1698, Steamed Buns Sand Toss. Translator, Namiyami Editor, Namiyami Opening. Fang Minghua had been searching for an opening the entire time, but this one was by far the closest to him yet. Cloud Piercer's bullets rained down. Fang Minghua could practically see the bullets flying past Laughing Song's eyes. Happy wouldn't retreat. Even if they had to take damage, they had to kill Laughing Song. But under Cloud Piercer's firepower, how could it be so easy to just tank the damage? Reinforced iron bones. The newly subbed and steamed bun was quick-witted. The moment Joe Zekai attacked, his steamed bun invasion activated reinforced iron bones. With super armor, his rhythm wouldn't be broken no matter how dense the rain of bullets. At worst, he would take more damage. The breakthrough point would have to be Soft Mist. Fang Minghua began paying more attention to Soft Mist's side. He watched Laughing Song's health carefully. Every second felt like a year. This was a match point. If Samsara could successfully rescue Laughing Song, Samsara would almost certainly win. The countless Samsara fans among the crowd stood up from their seats. Whether or not their team could lock in the win gripped their hearts. Closer, closer, they prayed in their hearts, because they could see that at this distance, Cloud Piercer's offense wasn't threatening enough. A bit closer, and his gunfire would be more dense, and he would be able to rely on chaining together his attacks to fully suppress Soft Mist's attacks. Or perhaps because she tried too hard to dodge, her rhythm would get messed up, and Fang Minghua would be able to find an opportunity to rescue himself. Advance. This was the conviction in Joe Zekai's heart. Opening. This was what Fang Minghua hoped for. He would never give up until the end. Tang Ru began feeling the pressure. Steamed Bun immediately activated reinforced iron bones. He wasn't feeling any pressure on his end, but that also meant that he was pushing it all onto Tang Ru. Joe Zek obviously wasn't going to waste his time trying to stop a super-armored character. Maybe Bao Rongxing shouldn't have activated reinforced iron bones, Pan Lin said. Maybe, but even if he hadn't, it wouldn't have stopped Joe Zekai from focusing on a single target, Li Yibo said. That's true, Pan Lin nodded his head. Maybe Bao Rongxing should try and protect Tang Ru, Li Yibo said. Her protection's already arrived, Pan Lin said. Ye Xiu's Lord Grim rushed towards Cloud Piercer, firing at him. Joe Zekai obviously saw him, but he had the same mentality as Tang Ru and Steamed Bun right now. Offense was his #1 priority. He would only deal with the attacks that would interfere with his offense. Hurry. There wasn't much time left. Once Ye Xiu's Lord Grim got close to him, Joe Zekai was certain that everything would end there. Ye Xiu's Lord Grim sticking onto him was far more threatening than in Wenny's little cold hands. He moved away, doing what he could to delay Lord Grim. He opened fired. This was the final sprint. There was only one chance left. Rapid firing, random firing, berserk firing. At this moment, Cloud Piercer activated every buff he had. Joe Zekai didn't hold back, pushing his firepower to its peak. Success or failure would be decided here. Gatling gun. Cloud Piercer suddenly stood his ground. He stopped firing with his dual guns, instead pulling out a heavy machine gun. Under the various sharpshooter buffs, the bullets from Gatling gun were practically connected as they flew out like a ray of light. Tang Ru immediately recognized that she had to dodge no matter what. If the laser-like rain of bullets landed, she would likely be knocked back. Soft Mist dodged. The Gatling gun followed her. As the gun turned, the bullets were like an orderly flight of steps, creating an arc. The arc forced soft mist to move in one direction. An opening finally appeared in front of Laughing Song. The opening that he had been waiting for who knew how long had come. At this moment, Fang Minghua's attention was entirely on Steamed Bun Invasion. He knew that the only one who could attack and stop him was Steamed Bun Invasion. He didn't have the ability to fight against Steamed Bun Invasion, but he could avoid him. He had to avoid him. Charge. Laughing Song charged towards that opening. However, his gaze was locked firmly onto Steamed Bun Invasion. Steamed Bun Invasion swung his fist as if it were a conditioned reflex. He sent a punch to intercept the fleeing Laughing Song, but no matter how fast his reaction speed was, it was just an ordinary punch, so ordinary that Fang Minghua nearly laughed. How easy! Fang Minghua quickly acted. Laughing Song leaned slightly to the side as he rushed forward. Steamed Bun Invasion missed. Fang Minghua obviously didn't think that it was over just because he had dodged this single punch. But with how easy it had been to avoid Steamed Bun Invasion's first attempt, he suddenly felt like he could see another opening on Steamed Bun Invasion. After one opening, another one followed. Fang Minghua surged with excitement. His fingers suddenly felt even lighter and nimbler than before. Laughing Song raised his cross, ready to cast an instant holy cure on himself. His situation before had been so dire that he hadn't even been able to cast an instant cast skill. Holy light gathered around his cross. Just before it shone onto Laughing Song, Steamed Bun Invasion's ordinary fist suddenly opened wide, releasing a handful of sand. Sand toss. The holy light extinguished. Fang Minghua couldn't describe what he was feeling with words. That punch was a sand toss. You can sand toss like that. If it's sand toss, then throw it earlier. Why would you clench your fist so tightly? If the hand holding the sand hit me, what would that have done? Sand toss. Fang Minghua suddenly had countless questions about this common brawler skill. Laughing Song had already been hit by the sudden sand toss. Fang Minghua hadn't been able to react to it in time. His screen turned dark. A max-leveled sand toss had a 100% chance to blind if it hit the face. The effect lasted 8 seconds. The countless Samsara fans closed their eyes. 8 seconds of blind. Laughing Song had no chance of escaping anymore. Zhou Zekai had created an opening for him, but Fang Minghua could only rely on himself to take it. However, with 8 seconds of blind, there was no hope left for Fang Minghua. What the fuck? He can't even dodge a sand toss, countless players cursed. The pro players were speechless. This sand toss, what should they say? It felt like a joke. It could be considered a cheap play by a normal player. But Steamed Bun had brought this cheese to the highest stage on glory, extinguishing Fang Minghua's last hopes. Unlucky. Everyone could sympathize with Fang Minghua. Now that everyone had seen it, everyone felt like they could easily deal with it. Against this delayed sand toss, you could dodge or interrupt it, easy as pie. But Fang Minghua was the first to be cheesed. When he saw that punch, the thought of it being a sand toss probably hadn't even crossed his mind, and because of that, what should have been child's play ended his life. Apart from sympathy, the pro players could only give him their sympathy. Pan Lin and Li Yibo didn't know what to say. It was such an important match point, and it was resolved through a little trick. This decisive match was filled with all sorts of weirdness. But in the end, Fang Minghua's time was over. Praying for Zhou Zekai to pull off another miracle was hopeless. Ye Xiu's Lord Grim had reached Cloud Piercer. With Lord Grim's mobility, Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer had no way to kite him. The two began an intense duel. Not long afterwards, Samsara's Laughing Song died. For both teams, the first to die was the healer. Everyone had faith in the words. Whoever controlled the enemy healer controlled the match. Now that both healers were dead, who knew what direction the match would move towards? At least it would still be a 5v5. However, many of the viewers felt somewhat strange when they saw the names of Happy's characters. Coincidentally, all of these people happened to be players from the 10th server. Lord Grim, Soft Mist, 1-inch Ash, Steamed Bun Invasion. Only Dancing Rain was slightly off. But the others, wasn't this the team in the 10th server that had set countless dungeon records? Chapter 1699. What a Brawler. Chapter 1699. What a Brawler. Translator. Namyami Editor. Namyami. Today, the 10th server players were no longer noobs. Many of them had reached the heavenly domain and begun their higher-level journey there. But whether they'd gone to the heavenly domain or remained in the 10th server, any gamer who had experienced that pioneering period in the 10th server could never forget the dungeon record war at that time. Even if every server would experience a period like that, even if most people were only bystanders, no new server's dungeon records had ever been so thoroughly dominated by the same people. The records they achieved seemed to symbolize eternity. And now, the names that had left these records appeared in the ultimate battle of the finals. Neat and orderly, just like the original, a team with no healer, only DPS. Dancing Rain, Cleansing Mist. The names of these two accounts weren't the same. But they were the same class. The names used the same characters. By now, everyone had basically guessed that the Cleansing Mist of that time had been used by the person currently playing Dancing Rain, Su Cheng. For a pro player to go for a normal server's dungeon record, many people would suspect them of bullying normal players. If this had been exposed at that time, Su Cheng probably would have suffered all sorts of condemnation. But now, the situation was different. Everyone had witnessed happy as this team grew step by step. The dungeoning team that had swept those records that had been their earliest form. Now they stood upon glory's highest stage. The players who had started in the 10th server, who had been only noobs back then, were thoroughly moved. They had never experienced any glory history before the 10th server. They had only heard about the past. They had never really been deeply affected by it, because it was at a distance. But Happy had risen suddenly from their 10th server to stand on glory's ultimate battlefield. In their eyes, this team was a symbol of their era. This was a new team who, in the middle of their era, had grown up with them and burst forth. In this moment, countless 10th server players were blazing with passion. With Team Happy, they could truly feel immersed in this moment. Never before had a team left such a clear and heavy mark upon a server. Never before, never until now. This is our era, this is our symbol, 10th server. Many gamers who had come from the 10th server suddenly erupted with this cheer, confusing many other players. This kind of immersion, this kind of significance of a symbol without experiencing it themselves, they could never understand. Even in the live audience, Samsara's home stadium, a commotion rose up. Of course, a number of Samsara fans had come from the 10th server as well. However, although the sight of these names may have caused memories to resurface, these gamers would not change sides because of this. The match continued. A list of characters could not kill an opponent. Ye Xiu and Zhou Zekai were fighting, and it was hard to tell who had the upper hand. Su Cheng and Jiang Batao were circling, although Dancing Rain was clearly moving closer to Lord Grim's side, trying to establish a connection. Tang Ru and Steamed Bun had finally taken care of Laughing Song, and the two of them were swiftly rushing toward Lord Grim. Happy's next target was Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer. That seemed to be the case. Happy was not a team that could be predicted through common principles, and it wasn't like they hadn't focused the opponent's core before. In that team battle against Tiny Herb in the regular season, they had focused and killed Wang Jixi's Vacaria, which had become a textbook example of this strategy. And in conditions where both sides no longer had a healer, attacking the absolute core of the one-man team, Samsara, Zhou Zekai, was simply following a logical train of thought. In the Tiny Herb match, when they'd focused Wang Jixi's Vacaria, even trading 2 for 1 was worth it. However, Samsara immediately detected this clear intention. This confrontation between Zhou Zekai and Ye Xiu right now was no less intense than their 1v1 had been last round. On one side, bullets flew. On the other, a weapon shifted between 1,000 forms. But when he saw more of Happy's players running toward him, Zhou Zekai knew this couldn't continue. Cloud Piercer began to fight while falling back. If only talking about movement speed, no character could keep up with Lord Grimm. But when a sharpshooter used aerial fire to move, the technique came with a natural protection of firepower. If the opponent wanted to give chase, they had to defend against the bullets that came their way. Neither side had a healer anymore. Decisions like blindly tanking damage now had to be weighed carefully. But Ye Xiu completely ignored this fact about the present situation. Lord Grimm opened his myriad manifestations umbrella charge. Lifting a shield only decreased the damage, it didn't completely negate it. Such a move still meant that he was tanking the damage to attack. But Ye Xiu had other reasons for doing this. Tang Ru and Steamed Bun were just about to arrive, so at this moment, it was of course crucial that he stick to Cloud Piercer so that they had a beautiful 3v1 situation. Even if Cloud Piercer didn't die, any amount of damage was helpful. Right now, the situation was that there were no healers. His Lord Grimm would sacrifice some blood now to see more blood spill from Cloud Piercer later. The charge instantly closed the distance between the two characters. Even Zhou Zekai himself knew that there was no way his Cloud Piercer could shake off Lord Grimm in the span of a few steps. When the charge activated, he was already controlling Cloud Piercer to change directions. Sidestep. Cloud Piercer stepped to the side, letting Lord Grimm's charge go past him. The skill allowed the user to move very fast, but because it was so fast, it was difficult to adjust or control the movement. But Ye Xiu was no ordinary person. When he saw Cloud Piercer dodging, he immediately canceled the charge. Against his own inertia, Lord Grimm twisted his body to change directions. However, Zhou Zekai had also predicted that he might be able to make this kind of response, and his character was already backing even further away. He wanted to use these kinds of non-stop direction changes to shake off Ye Xiu's Lord Grimm. This match had seen a cleric brawl. It had seen the cheap trick of Steamed Bun invasion tossing a handful of sand. It had been almost embarrassing for the audience to watch. But when they saw the direct confrontation between Ye Xiu and Zhou Zekai, this level, this skill, this technique demonstrated was just going up and up. Changing directions to get away, it was a very foundational technique. But when it came to Ye Xiu and Zhou Zekai, with the speed and frequency of these changes, not to mention the feints thrown in, it was almost too much for the eye to see. On the pro players' side, the seniors of the various teams all treated this as teaching material for their rookies to watch and learn. At the same time, their hearts were trembling as well. Zhou Zekai didn't manage to have Cloud Piercer shake off Lord Grimm, but Ye Xiu hadn't been able to let Lord Grimm get a solid control of Cloud Piercer. But reaching this point was already extremely difficult. For a sharpshooter to be tangled with Lord Grimm to this extent and still avoid being at a disadvantage, perhaps only Zhou Zekai could pull that off. And for someone to struggle with Cloud Piercer like this without letting him slip away, aside from Ye Xiu, there weren't very many who could. But overall, if this situation continued, it was Zhou Zekai who would be at a disadvantage. As long as Ye Xiu could pin down Cloud Piercer like this, he was achieving his goal. Tang Ru and Steamed Bun's characters were growing closer and closer. A brawler had mid-range attack skills, and Steamed Bun Invasion was already preparing his move. Most people had no way of guessing what attack this guy would use. If you thought too deeply, you would end up like Fang Minghua. If your thoughts were too shallow, then, well, Steamed Bun's skill was right there. He could use any number of high-level techniques. Brick. In the end, when Steamed Bun Invasion stepped within attack range, in his hand was still his favorite brick. The brick flew, but the distance was a bit far. While Cloud Piercer was struggling with Lord Grim, he lifted his guns, bang bang, and that brick was shattered in midair. "Whoa, you've got some skill." Steamed Bun's strange words immediately arrived. In all of glory, everyone knew that Joe Zekai very much had some skill. Truly, everyone found Steamed Bun's shocked tone incomprehensible. "Boss, I'm coming, watch me." Steamed Bun was still shouting. With this tone, it really seemed as though there were some powerful attack in the making. But if you wanted to say that this was him giving a signal to coordinate with Ye Xiu, that didn't seem too right. A signal for cooperation, it wouldn't come with such a grandiose announcement in the public chat. And so, Steamed Bun Invasion attacked again. Molotov cocktail, another flying projectile. What use was that? The high-level pro players could no longer take any of Steamed Bun's crude actions seriously. The brick had been shattered by Joe Zekai's fire in midair. What could this Molotov cocktail do? What's more, even if Joe Zekai didn't manage to shoot it down, then if it hit, it would just cause some burn damage. Cloud Piercer would just lose some health, that was all. It wouldn't help control the opponent at all. Every class type had a subclass that excelled in control. For the swordsman class, that was the Ghost Blade. For the gunner, the Spitfire, the mage, witch, the Nightwalker, warlock, the priest, exorcist. And among the fighter classes, the grappler's so-called control revolved around the strong priority of that class's grab skills, which would simply bind the opponent. If talking about the true meaning of control, the one at the front of the fighters was still the brawler class. Right now, Happy just needed to control Cloud Piercer. But then Steamed Bun Invasion came in with a brick, which was too far and posed no threat. And then a Molotov cocktail, which, even if it hit the opponent, would pose no threat of control. What kind of bullshit is this? Among the pro players, Tang Hao could barely stay seated. He felt that this kind of brawler level was embarrassing to the brawler class as a whole. Even though Steamed Bun had played a big role in killing Laughing Song, the skill he displayed then was nothing impressive. Everyone sympathized with Laughing Song. No one praised Steamed Bun for being exceptional. And now, in such a critical moment, Ye Xiu was working so hard to keep Joe Zekai from escaping. Steamed Bun Invasion had mid-range attack options. He could start supporting early, but these two attacks didn't give Joe Zekai any difficulty at all. "Get a brain, won't you?" Tang Hao couldn't help but begin shouting. Chapter 1700, Red-Black Clash. Chapter 1700, Red-Black Clash. Translator, Namyami. Editor, Namyami. The players laughed up their sleeves. Tang Hao was a rather haughty person. Let alone a rookie, he even looked down on many of the famous pro players. Steamed Bun had triggered him. It was as if he were Happy's coach. Seeing Steamed Bun's performance turned his expression unsightly. Steamed Bun Invasion's brainless Molotov cocktail ended up just like what everyone had expected. It was barely an inconvenience for Joe Zekai. However, without a healer, health became much more precious, so Joe Zekai didn't let the Molotov cocktail hit him. Cloud Piercer raised his guns. This time, he didn't even need 2 shots. He sniped the Molotov cocktail from the air with just 1 shot. Boom! The Molotov cocktail shattered and burst into an enormous fireball. The fire spread outwards. Joe Zekai's expression turned pale. Even though it was only for an instant, he clearly felt that the instant the fireball spread outwards, soft mist and Steamed Bun Invasion had been enveloped by it. This was a form of cover. Joe Zekai reacted swiftly, immediately realizing that he had been a bit careless. But that was also in part because of how sloppy Steamed Bun's Molotov cocktail was. No one had expected this sloppiness to have such a huge effect. The Molotov cocktail provided large-scale cover for Happy. At this moment, there was no time for Joe Zekai to think about too many things. He tanked Lord Grim's attack while moving to the side. He was repositioning himself to find a new angle of attack and to avoid Steamed Bun's and Tang Ru's potential follow-ups. They're here. Joe Zekai was mainly looking in Soft Mist's and Steamed Bun's direction. Sure enough, the blazing fireball was split apart in the center by a flash of red. Soft Mist, dragon breaks the ranks. That was close. It was a good thing Joe Zekai reacted quick enough, predicting what might happen next. If not, Cloud Piercer wouldn't have been able to dodge Soft Mist's dragon breaks the ranks. Soft Mist closed the distance in an instant. Ye Xiu had coordinated with Tang Ru and Steamed Bun, making sure that Lord Grim wouldn't obstruct Soft Mist's dragon breaks the ranks. Unfortunately, Joe Zekai had reacted too fast, preemptively dodging it. Dragon breaks the ranks missed. After all, with that type of cover, neither side could see each other. Tang Ru immediately rushed out with Dragon breaks the ranks, but she didn't know that Joe Zekai had moved away. By the time Soft Mist pierced through the fireball, it was too late for her to adjust her attack. Cancel. Tang Ru didn't feel bad about wasting the skill. She canceled Dragon breaks the ranks. However, the momentum brought by the skill wasn't small. Canceling wasn't the same as finishing the move. There wasn't as much control over her movements. As a result, Soft Mist continued to be pushed forward. Tang Ru had Soft Mist forcefully turn. Her sliding feet pressed a hole into the ground. Furious Dragon strikes the heart, another high-level skill. Even when facing Joe Zekai, Tang Ru didn't back down. In the blink of an eye, her Soft Mist switched places with Lord Grim, taking the role as the main attacker. Ye Xiu's Lord Grim moved to her side, becoming her support. Not good. When the pro players saw Ye Xiu and Tang Ru switch positions, they knew that the two of them together would be extremely difficult to defend against. No matter how capable Joe Zekai was, Cloud Piercer was still a sharpshooter. A 1v2 in close quarters wasn't just a difficult situation, but a dangerous situation. What's more, Steamed Bun Invasion had also charged through the fireball. His hands were waving around in the air. Who knew what ridiculous play he would pull off next? Everyone's attention was focused on this side. Everyone was wondering whether Happy would be able to kill Joe Zekai's Cloud Piercer. The other parts of the battle didn't seem as important. Soft Mist's furious dragon strikes the heart was just about to pierce into Cloud Piercer. Cloud Piercer was trying to dodge, but no one knew if he would be able to. Suddenly, a black shadow flickered between the two. Hua, two spears, one red, one black, clashed. The unstoppable furious dragon strikes the heart was knocked askew by the collision. The collision had been created by an attack with even higher priority than furious dragon strikes the heart. It was the attack that Soft Mist had just used. Dragon breaks the ranks. One autumn leaf. Sun Xiang's one autumn leaf suddenly returned. He hadn't targeted anyone with Dragon breaks the ranks. Instead, he put himself between two characters to protect Cloud Piercer. Tyrant's Destruction. One autumn leaf knocked aside Soft Mist's spear. Then he canceled Dragon breaks the ranks and followed with Tyrant's Destruction. He was planning on sweeping aside both Soft Mist and Lord Grim. Tang Ru refused to back down. She canceled her furious dragon strikes the heart and followed with a Tyrant's Destruction of her own. The two spears collided again. The same skill against the same skill. With both skills maxed, their damage and priority were the same. The winner of the clash would be decided by the character's stats. For Soft Mist, apart from dancing fire flowing flames, she had other silver equipment that Happy had scrambled together. Soft Mist's stats wouldn't lose to most other battle mages in the pro scene, but compared to the battle god, one autumn leaf, there was still a clear disparity. The two skills collided and Soft Mist clearly lost. Not only did one autumn leaf's evil annihilation stop the momentum from Soft Mist's dancing fire flowing flames, it continued along its original trajectory. Even so, the power of one autumn leaf's attack was reduced significantly. Whether it was speed or damage, the skill was no longer a threat. But one autumn leaf had the upper hand. If he switched moves, his would come out before Soft Mist's. Sky Strike. evil annihilation suddenly swung upwards. The tyrant's destruction changed into sky strike. The slow spear suddenly accelerated. Soft mists dancing fire-flowing flames had been knocked aside. It wouldn't be easy for her to block this sky strike from her position. This was obviously why Sun Xiang had chosen to switch to sky strike. The average viewer wouldn't be able to understand this tiny detail. Even if the sky strike wouldn't be easy to parry, Tang Ru still didn't back down. She struck back with a sky strike of her own. This time, there wouldn't be a collision. It would be a trade. It was a trade, but one came before the other. One autumn leaf was faster. Once soft mist was launched into the air, it was hard to say if her sky strike would reach one autumn leaf. Tang Ru wasn't sure either, but she continued onwards. Bang! She hadn't parried, but the sound of a parry could be heard. Soft mist sky strike swept forward, but one autumn leaf sky strike had been blocked by Lord Grimm's dragon tooth from the side. Tang Ru didn't back down, not only because of her confidence in herself, but her confidence in Ye Xiu. She trusted that Ye Xiu would help her when she needed it. One autumn leaf sky strike was blocked. It was too late for him to dodge soft mist sky strike. After being hit by dancing fire-flowing flames, he was launched into the air. But Tang Ru had Ye Xiu, and Sun Xiang had Zhou Zekai. After being protected by one autumn leaf, Cloud Piercer didn't immediately run off. As soon as one autumn leaf was launched into the air, a figure appeared behind him. Cloud Piercer had a long sniper rifle aimed steady. Thunder Snipe. Zhou Zekai had Cloud Piercer take out this powerful skill. The long sniper rifle was aimed right at Soft Mist's head. The sparks flying out from the muzzle of the gun seemed to stick to Soft Mist. At this distance, it was impossible for Soft Mist to dodge the Thunder Snipe. Blood burst from Soft Mist's head. A huge loss. The spectators all thought the same. Both sides had gone back and forth. Even though Soft Mist had successfully knocked one autumn leaf into the air, the damage from Thunder Snipe was on an entirely different level. What's worse was that one autumn leaf was in the perfect position to be attacked, but with the Thunder Snipe, there was no possibility of Soft Mist following up. The knockback from Thunder Snipe was massive. Soft Mist was still stumbling back. Ye Xiu was still there. But Lord Grimm didn't have any attacks that could match Thunder Snipe's damage. The damage from that one snipe wasn't something that he could regain with a single attack. Sword draw, cold light flickered, a blade unsheathed. Lord Grimm attacked both Cloud Piercer and one autumn leaf while also protecting Soft Mist. It was the best he could do. One autumn leaf couldn't dodge while in the air. The sword draw was fast too. He had no time to parry it either. He could only take the hit. However, Zhou Zekai had predicted that Ye Xiu would respond in some way. After successfully landing Thunder Snipe, he retreated. It was almost as if Lord Grimm and Cloud Piercer were in sync. The sword draw was dodged cleanly. Cloud Piercer retreated. Close combat against close-ranged classes was very unfavorable for a sharpshooter. Zhou Zekai took this opportunity to pull apart from Happy's characters. As he retreated, he continued to attack and protect one autumn leaf. At the same time, their sixth player, Du Ming's moon-luring Frost, had finally arrived and was about to enter the fray. But he was still a bit far from this side of the battle. "I'm here," Steamed Bun typed into the chat. This was a common habit amongst in-game players. Once Steamed Bun became a pro player, he didn't throw this habit away. In the competitive scene, others might be using the chat to wage psychological warfare on the opponents. On the other hand, Steamed Bun used the chat to say meaningless nonsense. "Okay, you're here. So what?" Many of the viewers replied back inwardly.